Good evening to you all. Very good evening to you all. My name is Kasim Ali. I am the chair of the committee, Housing and Communities. And this meeting is taking place at the council now. And thank you very much, all of you, tonight. Looks we have a vast agenda as well as vast room. So thank you very much for all of you to making the time to come to this meeting at the council, the scrutiny committee meeting. Before I begin our meeting, can I ask the committee members please to switch off their mobiles if not make them silent, so that there will be no interruptions for the period we are in the meeting. Before we start the meeting, we always start with the 72 seconds. I don't know why that is, because of the disaster we had in our borough. So we will start now with the 72 seconds to remember those we have lost. Thank you. Thank you. This is the first meeting of the year, so I'll take the opportunity to say Happy New Year to you all. And I hope you all had a fantastic and fruitful and restful Christmas as well as the New Year. To begin with, the first agenda item is any absent, A1. I believe we have the whole committee already. A2 and declaration of interest. Thank you. A3 minutes of the last meeting, chaired by the vice chair.
Happy with them, but the answers.
Yeah, so I will sign that meeting.
Could I just, just one follow-up question. I'd like to thank the lead member of the communities for producing the leaflet that was requested at such speed, and I can report from my own experience it's been very well received by our residents. That was the leaflet with regard to warm hubs, and the leaflet was very useful. Thank you very much.
Thank
Can I
you.
also raise
Councillor
a
Simms.
point on the minutes? I'm not sure how these things are recorded, but one of the items on today's agenda was raised as a urgent matter of local interest, which is the local lettings policy. And it isn't recorded in the minutes under any urgent business.
It was,
Yes, please.
We picked it up as part of the work programme because you'd asked for it
Just
at
checking.
previous
Thanks.
meetings, that's how it came through.
Will that satisfy you? Thank you.
Yeah, at the last meeting, I complained about the way the tenancy conditions review was being conducted, and it's not in the minutes. This is yet another meeting where the tenancy conditions review has been missed out of minutes.
I certainly spoke. I think you'd have to look at that afterwards to see exactly, and perhaps look at the recording of the meeting.
Yeah.
To get
Will that-
get an amendment in for you.
Will that be okay?
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
fine.
I take it we are recording tonight, by the way. Yes, because my last licensing meeting, I was quite fine. We weren't recorded.
We are live.
Yeah, good.
So the meeting was recorded and officers will go back and make the corrections. Thank you for raising that. Any other? Okay, we will make the amendments and we'll assign the meeting as it is. should be.
Councillor, could I request that you hear the local lettings part of the meeting first, because I think a lot of people are here for this meeting here, or for that part.
That's a request I would like to grant, but I've already accepted another request we could go first. For that reason, I may take that as a second.
Okay.
That would be, I think, something we can do if the committee is having.
It takes the order for most of the.
Okay, because I've already got another agenda item that moves forward, but I will take that as a second.
Thank you.
Which one?
Yep. Yes, we've moved agenda item 8 to make it number 1. For request for notices and it's a transport issue, and I'm happy to do that. So we will start with the New Homes Program. Just to add, the New Homes Program is an agenda item that we normally pull twice in a scrutiny meeting. This is ongoing. Things have changed from last year to this year, or even before. So it will be again pulled this scrutiny meeting. So the New Homes Program will always be under scrutiny as well, as long as the program is still active. So I would like to call the lead member and the lead member for housing and the deputy lead of the council, and also any other officer who would like to contribute.
I'll just give a very short, thank you Mr Chairman, I'll just give a very short introduction before you. I'll just join you in thanking attendance. It's just like the old days, coming here and having a full attendance. So thank you for all coming. This is an update report called by the committee. Our resolve is still there for our 600 homes, minimum of 50% of social rent. And the report really talks about some of the challenges that we're incurring, the big one being inflation, and that's inflation just not in labour but also in terms of the costs of materials as well. So within the report there's an outline of what we're doing in terms of mitigation, and then on table 6.4 you can see a summary of the projects that we currently have in programme. The difference for those that are doing their maths on 497 is obviously the current list doesn't include Eaton, which is something we've started dialogue again with the residents and we're going to move forward. And I think that's really, I'll leave it. I'm happy to, I'm looking at Anna if there's anything else you want to say, otherwise go straight to questions.
Any comments?
No, great explanation, thanks.
Thank you very much, Jay. I have one quick question and then followed by another one immediately, and then hopefully we'll be open to the select committee members and any other councillor who may want to do that, followed by the members of the public. To begin with, could you elaborate a bit more at paragraph 4.2? You mentioned the increasing cost of the construction as well as labour and interest rates as well. And we have a budget of £250 million for this project. What will be the end project for that? I will just add the second question immediately so that you can answer.
Yep.
And we had 5.2 paragraph. You've mentioned that the budget was £250 million. 33.6 million pounds was grant from the GLA, GLA, and then on top of that, we have lost about £7.6 million. I would like to know, and I think that's related to Eden, but I would like to know why the council could not reach the key date that has been asked by GLA, and what was the cause for that delay, and why we have lost nearly £10 million for not meeting the date that's required.
So thank you. The budget, the overarching budget envelope for the New Homes Programme is 250 million, and that was set out quite early on in terms of trying to understand unit costs, etc. What we've done is we've drawn down from that budget envelope, so our total scheme costs are not hitting that 250 million. I can't tell you immediately the value, but what I can do is come back and I can feed it back in on what the current value is, because it changes when we're running scenarios and viability on future schemes. It will change, but we can certainly provide you with the current state of play of the overall budget, but it is not 250 million, it's closer to 180 million at this moment in time. In relation to your question around grant, the GLA operates a 3-year funding window, and they have timescales which they must meet start on site by agreed dates, and the end of the funding window is March of this year. We follow quite a detailed engagement process with our communities on all of our schemes, and we don't want to rush that for those dates. It's more important to us to actually engage with the community and deliver a scheme that the community want to see in their community next door to where they live. And so we had some very challenging conversations with the GLA about the grant, and they recognised why we were handing the money back, but recognised we wanted to still deliver those schemes. And so we do have an open engagement with the GLA to try and look at accessing the next funding round. So we're not saying all is lost, but for example, Needham, as you rightly noted, that scheme was paused. So we went to the GLA and said, we will not be pushing the scheme through to meet your funding deadlines. So we are handing the grant back.
But just to add, you will recall, Chairman, that with the Edenham scheme, we ended up with a difference of opinion with local residents, and I'd have to say to some of the Labour colleagues, your Labour colleagues as well, insofar that if we weren't able to submit a viable scheme and we weren't able to effectively, by pulling it, meet the deadline, so consequently we lost the grant. But, I'm optimistic going back, and as I say, we've already started a dialogue again to come up with something that works both financially and obviously for the local residents.
So you're going back to
We have quarterly meetings with them, and they are monitoring schemes that we don't have grant on yet, but we are developing viabilities for, such as Latimer, and they're also keeping appraised of, as Kim said, we're looking to start dialogue again with the community on Edenham. And we do inform the GLA of that, so they are aware, and there are always opportunities that we can go back and see if there's any grant available.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks very much for the report. It's quite a while since we saw an update on this one, but it was useful to see it. I couldn't remember, and I'm afraid I didn't have time to research the last report, the Granger Homes at Phase 0. Can you just give me an update on what is it, where is it, and what is it?
So in the pre-Grenfell period, the council reached an agreement with Granger, which is a developer of private rented housing, for development on a number of council-owned sites where the private rented housing would be built and the proceeds would be shared between Granger and council. After the Grenfell tragedy, it was agreed the terms of that arrangement changed, and it was agreed the council would just buy those homes back off. So those are a number of units. I'm going to remember some of the sites, but not all of them.
There's multiple
There's
sites.
one at Bowmore Road, one at Kensington Road, one at Middle Road,
And then Hortensia.
and
RMUs.
and they're a mixture of social rent, intermediate, and private. So they're not built by the council. They were built by Granger and bought back, but they're included in the numbers.
Of course, I understand that. And I think I'd forgive me if that was already in the previous report.
I don't think it was, so apologies, but we categorise it because it's linked to additional homes as well as grants that we've received for additional new homes.
That's why I absolutely.
But just to add in, the 4 that are listed on the table as open rent are the ones that we're making available for the
Okay, good. And just looking at the timeline on the right-hand side, I see we're a month away from the first completion.
We are. We visited it last week, much excitement.
Well,
We're very much inviting the committee if you'd like to come and see once it's finished, to see what
So
it
that was
is.
my next point is when are we going to get an invite to see some of these? Because we talk about this in this committee, and we don't seem to go out very much, so I think we would like to.
I would ask that I don't at this point want to visit to Hewer Street to stop them
No.
finishing on
Of course we don't
time.
want to stop them.
However, certainly really happy to organise a visit to the committee to Kensal Road, because that one is, you can see, the new community facilities as well, which is quite an important scheme.
And final question is, we've got this nice timeline down the right-hand side. What's changed on that last update, or what you said last time?
No, there has been delays. The delays on future schemes, Barby and Silchester. So Barby specifically, there was delays through the agreement with the Department for Education on the disposal of the school land. And so that has delayed our start on site and therefore completion. One thing I do want to note is that all of the schemes on here, two excluded on that, are in contract, apart from Latimer. We're working on viability, so they will all be either imminently started on site or have started on site. And Lots Road is actually the subject of a leadership team report in February.
And I think just to highlight, there's one site here, St Helens, which is a small site of 8, of which only 4 of them will be open market to social rent, and that's one we're having a good look at in terms of the cost for the overall scheme with the quotes that are coming in, because I think it's fair as far as the council is concerned, we're not going to build the link cost. So it's one we're having a close look at, and it might not be, or might have to come back and think about it again, but it's a small scheme.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Yeah.
Councillor.
I just want to ask about paragraph 4.8, when you talk about risk bearing. And I would like to know what sort of risk bearing you're considering.
We have, when we set out in the scheme, we have level of provisional sums within the contract. And what we work on with the contractor is finalising those provisional sums, because they're normally elements that we can't define until we're actually on site, such as if we did detailed ground investigation, there was some contamination. So I liken it to, there's a black and white, there's also a grey. And so it is through negotiation we get to with the contractor to share the risk, to share the pain, because both of us can share the gain if there are any savings that we can derive, but both of us as partners should be sharing the pain as well. So we measure our risks. We've got corporate risks within the council, scheme by scheme risks, but also we want to work closely with the contractor so that we're open about all the risks, and so we can categorise them and mitigate any of those impacts. And that's what we do. Some of them are financial sharing, some of them are actually who takes responsibility for managing this risk and the actual outcomes of that risk.
Thank you. Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. I know you mentioned inflation as a big challenge, Councillor Taylor-Smith. Just in regard to paragraph 4.2, I know there's a lot of forecasting going on there. When inflation plateaus, price rises for bricks, wage. Just like to know 2 questions. What's the source for that forecasting? Is it internal, or have you gone out externally to get it? And second, how critical is it to the new homes programme if it's incorrect? So, for instance, inflation actually plateaus a year later, 2025, how would that impact the programme?
I'll give a short answer. I mean, inflation to a certain extent we mitigate by contract. I mean, where we've seen the impact on us, or the original valuation appraisals we did with quantity surveying in terms of working out what the overall cost was going to be, and when it goes to come out to tender, that's where we've seen an impact as far as inflation. So as far as fixed contract, the way we do it, then we can mitigate as far as the main part of the cost, which is the construction cost.
The source for this is we have cost consultants that we work with who have provided us some information, and we also get information from contractors that we work with. So we do try and, you know, because contractors will say one thing, but we actually try and use other sources that are maybe less contractor focused, more sector focused. Because the contractor, when I asked them about price rises, so we actually try and balance that. Across the council, we're obviously seeing inflation across a number of areas, not just new buildings. So there are measures, and I think they'll be reported in the medium-term financial strategy report that goes to leadership team in February, because obviously energy costs have significantly increased, and there's various other factors. So, but we actually model, or finance actually model, kind of future inflation. If it's at 20%, if it's at 35%, if it's 50%. So.
And obviously, at the point you agree with the construction contract, then you kind of lock the price, and then a lot of the risk, uncertainty falls away. For the schemes where that hasn't yet happened, as Anna says, you're running a model which has your kind of your current forecast, the current information you're working on. If in the example you give, that inflation position to worsen, we would kind of then update the model, and effectively you then have to find other ways to change other assumptions in the model to make the scheme rebalance. But there's only a number of ways you can do that. You can change the mix of tenures in the scheme. You can seek new additional kind of cash input into the scheme, either from resources that the council has itself, or seek further grant from the GLA. If you see what I mean. But you've got to, if something's being pushed up, you've got to find something else in the model to push it down to bring the scheme to viable. If that makes sense.
Does make sense, thank you.
Once I'm done with the councillors, select committee members, I'll come to Ridge councillors, followed by the members of the public. So please, Councillor Ross.
Yeah, following on from that, have you had to sort of downscale in terms of the finish of the final product and the materials you've used? Have you had to kind of get some cheaper way of doing things? At all, like, I don't know, Margaret's kitchen.
No, we haven't compromised on safety or quality.
So not on quality either? No.
We aren't changing anything that affects quality, safety or comfort.
Okay.
What we are, so all of the schemes, apart from Latimer, are following the same quality requirements, and we're working on a refresh of our specification, you know, types of tiles, types of flooring, and we're working on a refresh of that, with the overriding aim not impacting on design, comfort or quality, or safety, so that we can use a similar type of kitchen, but it will be the same number of units, it will be the same fitted items.
Yeah, it's important to say from the outset, I always said that I wanted these to be tenure life.
Mhm.
So when you come on your guided tour, you're going to a private rental, you're going to a social rental, and there won't be any difference between the two of them. And equally, I didn't want to have, board doors and all that bits and pieces as well. So we've kept that, and I think you'll be impressed when you see the quality of the accommodation that we will be providing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Simmons.
Thank you very much. So following on from that, when you say tenure blind, what we mean is the specification for market rent is going to be the same?
Yes.
Oh, fantastic, thank you. And my other question was, given the current state of uncertainty in building regulations, I'm just wondering what steps you've taken or will take to, and what assurances you can give that the new homes will be safe and not defective, which that may change, the specification, the regulation may change, and what is the associated risk to the council around that?
I'll start, and again, so we obviously have our own fire assessment team within the council, because we're still the only council that can do the certification. And we've set the standard as far as fire safety, understandably very, very high in terms of the specification that is going to go into the building. It's much higher than one would normally expect as far as the building control is concerned. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, the sort of things we're doing and putting into the building.
Yeah, we've got sprinkler systems throughout. We have worked very closely with the housing management fire safety team. When we are on site, which is another part of your question, it's about how you can assure quality. We've actually got an independent clerk of works that we've appointed. They're currently going around on our schemes that are due to finish twice weekly at this moment in time, because you can't have one member of staff from my team going out. They don't have eyes on everything. The other thing we also do is at the start of every contract, I meet with the directors of the contractors and I take it from square one and have a conversation with them to say, you have chosen to tender and sign a contract with us, and that comes with some responsibilities, and that comes with a great level of scrutiny and oversight from my team, but there also becomes a responsibility from them, and so we do have that level of monitoring throughout. And I think part of this is not only about the monitoring on site and the engagement, but it's actually early engagement with a contractor partner, so that they don't think this is just another new build scheme in another borough, because it's not.
A couple of things like that is that one of the arguments in favour of us developing these sites in-house is that we have much better control over the quality and specification than we would if we were in any kind of partnership. And that's obviously in this borough, more than any other, a huge priority. The other thing I'd say is that for these new build homes, and in fact for the work that we're doing to refurbish existing homes, we're taking an approach partly to mitigate against the risk you described, but us being kind of caught out by changes in building regs. But actually, anyway, we think it's the right thing to do, not just to be minimally compliant, but to go beyond the minimal compliance and have a standard which kind of we probably believe is the kind of safe, which in all cases doesn't necessarily match up with what we today's regulatory environment being minimally compliant. And I think that gives us a certain amount of future proofing, if you see what I mean. The other thing is that we, again, like other councils, but we probably do it a bit more than most, are closely monitoring those changes in the regulatory environment, and they tend to be kind of telegraphed relatively early before they come into play. So we can understand it to some extent. It's a question you take very seriously.
Thank you.
Just one question. Can you assure us that we are still aiming for above 50% social rent, or is that something you're looking to compromise on?
Yes.
Thank you.
Sure you, otherwise we wouldn't do it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wood-Bascom.
Thank you, Chair, very much. Under 4.9, I just wanted to raise a question to get clarification. So I understood the review undertaken by council specification. In terms of specification, are the new homes aligned with council's 2030 net zero objective? And also on that, there's a line in another paper which is on HRA, where there's a line there which says works on climate on carbon zero, the new homes programme. Now, I'm wondering if there's any overlap between those two, and also whether between them they're aligned with the 2030 objective of the council.
You can go.
So there's what we've wanted to achieve is as close to carbon zero as possible, but that comes with it quite a high cost. What we have in our schemes is we want them to be thermally efficient, so that there is a limited impact and a low fuel cost for the residents that live there. So we have increased levels of solid wall insulation, and we also are looking at in some areas air source heat pumps. On other schemes we've got combined heat and power systems. We also have on some schemes a cooling and heating system, and there are also triple glazing for not only keeping the heat in, keeping the property cool, but also reducing noise as well. So we did have one scheme that we were looking at to try and deliver to passive house standards, but it was not a viable scheme. And we have tried our utmost. Now, one of our initial schemes, Hewer Street, which is the first handover, is actually not a new build, it's a refurbishment of an old funeral parlour. That's got already very thick walls. We've added internal insulation onto those walls, but it will not hit carbon zero because the windows we've had to fit are kind of almost sash windows because it keeps in with the style of the building. So we've had some challenges, and I think some of the areas of our schemes we've had to really focus very much on reduction in noise pollution from the westway of the TfL. So we've had to balance that with the carbon zero aspiration. So we have tried our utmost to deliver schemes that have low fuel costs, high levels of comfort for living in there, but they do not achieve carbon zero. So they're trying their utmost to, but they will contribute.
And can I just chip in on that? Because I think our aspiration was always to get to carbon zero. Our experience is, and Hewer Street's a good example, that you'll get to a very high level. To get that last bit costs an absolute fortune. I mean, the incremental cost of getting that last bit is so what we recognise is that in order to get to carbon zero, the likelihood is that we will be looking and exploring things such as offset that last element of cost, rather than putting it into the building contract, which would just make the project money.
So if I understand this correctly, is the overall picture is that you're unlikely to hit carbon zero, but you'll know from your calculations
it will be pretty close
how much you're falling short.
Yeah, and the worst one will probably be Hewer Street, which will be a B, and EPC meeting there.
That measurement can then be addressed if quality takes that direction by an offset.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think we had one question from the members of the public. Okay, sorry. Did you put your hand up, sir? Okay, you did. Okay, yeah, sorry.
I just wanted clarification from the officer. Did the officer refer to the Silchester site?
Silchester is one of the
Silchester
Arches.
Alright, so I've got a question which is threefold. Will there be a public participation plan with regards to that side? Will there be a public participation charter? And will there be a resident oversight? Along with about that.
Sorry?
Resident oversight.
A resident oversight. So we've had 3 rounds of consultation on the Silchester site through the design, and we also not only resident consultation, but it was local businesses as well. The contractor has been appointed on site, and the works have commenced. I believe they're starting. And we have agreement with TfL. And they're going to be starting pilot works. There will be a communication plan on the contractor.
So that's not public participation. So are you saying that there's no public participation plan?
I'm happy to say there will be no public plan.
We're not
Because the contract's been awarded and it's now a building site operated under control of the contractor. So obviously the oversight will come through from our clerk of works, some checking work. And not from a public part.
But to be clear, I would say that
I'm not talking about consultation when you want to build.
across the whole programme, we've done the engagement that's led up to the design and the letting of the contract. Has all been done in a way that's consistent with the council's charter of public participation. So really, by far the largest opportunity for the community to kind of impact what's happening is up to the point of the contract being let. And that on this scheme has already been done.
So there's no participation, maybe the only communication.
Once the contract's been awarded, no.
Can I jump in here? I think what's needed to be clarification here is if there has been 3, for example, in my ward, 3 consultations, I took part, most of them, and if there were 3 similar consultations in your ward, and I think what's needed, the public participation will be whatever has been designed and agreed to be fulfilled. That requires a local community input. And I think that's where they're coming in. If what has been agreed and what has been contracted, the contractor, how they've delivered, this also needs participation. So if there's any way, I'll just finish the point, if there is any way the local community can get involved or what has been agreed to be delivered, then that will be transparency at all levels.
Yeah, but sorry, Mr. Chairman, I can't quite understand because obviously there's a number of phases to this. The first one is the consultation, which we do with our residents.
Absolutely.
We come up with a design after a number of iterations, and we say this is what we're proposing to put through to planning. We'll then put it into planning. That in itself is another opportunity to people to comment on the final design that we're going to build. And obviously, with the first phase went through without, I think on delegated powers as far as the office is concerned. So clearly there was people were happy with what they saw with relation to what was then contracted for. After we got our planning permission, then it really is a mechanical process of getting a contractor appointed to deliver what we've got our planning permission for. And then it obviously goes under that contract. And then there wouldn't be an opportunity for resident involvement. But residents can get involved at the consultation, they can also get involved at the planning stage if there's any issue.
I understand, and that's a valid point. So, I understand that I understand that's a valid point. However, what has been contracted, if it's delivered to the Nordic standard or what has been agreed, how will the local resident will have to say? Will their voice be heard? And I think that can also be covered under the communication. There will always be opportunity for the local community to be
signing off the building works?
No, not just, for example, I'll give you an example. I remember both you and I were visitors, or we've met in my ward, where a Grenfell company that's involved Grenfell material was used. That was under heating of the school. That was not part of the contract. That was not really specified. And I think if something like this happens, will the local community have a say? And that is what I think where the local community is coming from. If that kind of thing, because you and I both attended at the demonstration, and I'm sure you've rectified the problem at the time at the school and in my ward. If something similar happens in the contract and the contractor uses material which is not fit for purpose, what the local community can do, will they have a say? That is, I'm sure, what they are after.
Well, this is a say. Chairman. I mean, obviously, you're talking about a specific issue with regard to Bulby School and the contract, which was done some time ago. I mean, of course, residents will always get a say. There will be issues that they will bring here if they're in terms of unhappy. But what we're not able to do is involve the residents in looking at the materials that we're ordering through a complex contract. As you can see, some of the costs which are quite high. But I believe that the process we have of consultation going through to planning in a transparent way and the scrutiny we have here gives the residents an opportunity to raise issues with us.
Just to give some reassurance on that very specific point, the materials that were involved in that instance, by councillor and others in that category, are now very explicitly banned from sites that we haven't done.
And it's within the contract.
It's within the contract.
That's only happen after the local community raise their voices, and that is the required. If the local community can raise their voices, yes, and this is the platform they can do, as well as any other platform, and the local council will be able to.
Especially with the cladding and Alconic, what happened what happened.
Thank you. Fair enough.
Very
have to move on. I'm
very
afraid.
quickly. So we've established no engagement. So when we welcome them whether they are, we don't know when they come in. But should we have a copy of the communications plan so we understand how you are planning to communicate with people, and if you understand their circumstances and the best way to communicate with them. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Smith, last point, please.
Yeah, just very quickly, just following on. I think talking about insulation and the specification of net zero and what have you, I think residents would be somewhat reassured to know that there will be no Kingspan, no Archive, we know the names of the companies.
We've just confirmed that. It's actually written in the contract.
Great.
They won't use those products.
Fantastic.
But just to add, when I have my initial conversations with the contractors, there is a statement I make and to
Great.
say it needs to be fed down through their supply chain as well.
Thank you.
And we need more transparency as well, so
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then just for the record, on the question of the Silchester site, as I recall of the engagement that I attended, significant number of residents are not happy. There was no option in that consultation to not have it. So the scope of the consultation was of a limited range, and there were objections. So I think Kim said earlier that nobody objected at planning. And therefore we assume that residents are happy with it.
I was talking about phase one.
Yeah.
That's a phase 2 site. Phase 1 went through.
So-
Silchester, you're
so
absolutely right.
Savion-
We started with a height above where we
I
ended up
know.
finishing from discussions.
Yeah.
And then we got to a position whereby we came up with a height with something that was viable to allow us to deliver. So yes, you were right that there were a number of objections to the planning, but the planning was ultimately passed.
I know. But so for the record, I think let it show that residents were not happy about that development.
Phase 2, yeah.
The Silchester
Well, there were
Arts site,
registered
however you
objections.
call it.
There were registered objections, but there were also
At
support.
the engagement and consultation stage, residents raised objections, and as you say, at planning also. So I think we just need to go forward in that, acknowledging that, not trying to sort of, we need to be careful not to give an impression that everyone's happy with it when they're not.
Within phase 1, they weren't happy. I mean,
We're
any
talking
development,
about- sorry,
but I'm just
about the
saying in
side.
terms of the
I think we're
process,
confusing.
the process of house building is such that yes, people locally will always have a say, and there'll be those people that are unhappy, and that I accept.
I just think Sammy raised a point about Silchester Arches site, and that's what I was referring to. So if you were referring to something different, I wasn't clear about it.
Thank you. I think we will rest the council. Do you want to make a?
Just the consultation around the school extension as well. The residents of Verity aren't happy with it because of the noise that the school makes already, increasing the number of children and stuff, and the open planned garden that they're planning to do, where it will just impact us on work because it's all houses. You know, it affects us at the moment, so it's just going to get worse.
Did you mention that in the consultation, or you're talking
We've
about the
mentioned it
actual?
with David Benson, yes.
Okay. Any suggestions on that?
It's not my project, it's the school project.
School project, okay. Well, I think if it's then school projects, you will have to come back to your relevant team. Will come back to you. Officers will pass the your requirements. Thank you very much for raising that point. Yes, as we've just said, this agenda item, we will move on from it. I understand important points have been mentioned, not only to communicate with the local residents, but also to make sure that what has agreed will be fulfilled and the contract will happen as it's been promised to be. And carbon zero, obviously, we talked about it. There will be no carbon zero, but it will be close to. Again, I'm looking for the number. I was expecting to get to 40, 80%, or 90%. I hope that will be when information is available. And the missed deadline of the and loss of £7.6 million, hopefully the lead number will go back in the senior offices to London, the mayor's office, and hopefully we'll get that money back. And once again, no safety compromise has been made for the New Homes program. So thank you very much for your participation. We now move on to the agenda item. We can also moving forward. Once again, residents, thank you very much for coming. We will give each and every one of you the questions that you want at the time. And if there is one want to speak on your behalf, I'm happy to welcome and allocate a couple of more minutes more. If not, I will be happy to give you each one time to ask questions. As we said before, this Housing and Community Select Committee welcomes the residents' participation, and however it takes, we will answer and will try to answer the questions by the relevant lead members. Now I would like to welcome Agenda A5, the local elections plan and the Lancaster West and from the lead member or the NEC.
Again, I'll give a short introduction, if I may, Mr. Chairman. So, a little bit of history, obviously, on the Lancaster West estate. In the immediate aftermath, we set up, first of all, the rental settle homes policy, which gave people the ability, those that left and wanted to move somewhere else within the borough. That was set up, that's still in place. And then in 2019, we bought the local lettings policy, which allowed people to move within the estate by giving priority. And that was then, it came to review in 2020. It was then extended for another 3 years, 2023 to November this year. So it now is up for review, and we need to obviously have to consider it. I think reflecting on it, I think it's been a great success. It has provided support both to local residents who live on the Lancaster West estate. It's enabled families to stay in the area where you have overcrowding and stop people moving around. It's also, you can see from the tables, it's been helpful for us to encourage downsizing, because the one big problem we have as a council is the lack of available larger homes, and again, it is demonstrated to do that. And then latterly, as we have now gone into the refurbishment programme of the Lancaster West, it's an integral part of decanting. It enables us to move people from existing homes into some of the homes which are available vacant as far as local letting is concerned, to do the refurbishment and then move them back again. So, I mean, now is a time to review, and it's fair to say that we're going to have a lot of different views here, and it's going to be great, because we're going to be hearing from those today, from the people that have come here. We're at the stage where we're listening. You know, we're listening to people's comments, and we'll be taking that evaluation with a view to, obviously, as part of our consultation on this decision, which will be taken, you know, later on in the year. But I mean, it's very, very simple. It's either keep, stop, or change.
Thank you. Any other comments from the? Okay, thank you. As we have a decent number of our residents, I will welcome questions from the select committee first, and then followed by council. But let's give more time to the residents who've made the journey to come here this evening, and each and every one of you views will be recorded and minuted. Hopefully the officers can hear that now, minuted, and make sure they will be on the record. Any questions from the select committee members? Councillor Simmons.
Thank you. I was just noticing that Treadgold House is not within the local lettings policy. Is that correct?
Charles?
Treadgold, I believe it is.
Yeah.
Part of the Lancaster West.
It is part of that.
Okay, thank you, because it wasn't clear from the report. It's aimed to help tenants of the Lancaster West Estate and Brownlee House.
Yeah, but the Treadgold House is part of the Lancaster West Estate, so
Okay,
that
thank you.
includes Treadgold.
Just checking, just checking. Thank you.
Councillor Graham.
Thanks very much. Firstly, a couple of points of detail. So paragraph 5.2 talks about the Grenfell survivors and 198 households now in permanent accommodation. Did I read elsewhere that the 3 remaining families have accepted permanent accommodation and they're just awaiting that to be prepared for them?
I'm just referring to 2 definitely, 1 we're actually acquiring the property.
Yes.
So they've accepted the one that we're acquiring,
Okay.
but technically we don't own it yet.
I see, right, okay, so that's sort of coming on nicely then, obviously a complex.
We've identified homes that.
Okay, and then on the Grenfell homes policy, paragraph 5.4, we've got 9 households rehoused. Do we have any feedback yet as to how they're doing in their new homes? I mean, are they settling in the new ones, or is it too early to say?
It is too early. We've not had any comments so far, and we are engaging with them in terms of ensuring that they are settled. But we've not had any feedback that anybody's unsettled since they've been rehoused via the settlement transport.
That will be a question we would want to explore in maybe a year prime in the next this subject, because obviously we're at early days on this. Subject final point then on paragraph 5.9, the first paragraph 5.9.2, with that number, it refers, in a slightly tangential point, it refers to the rental properties in London. Are you aware that the borough's lost 5,000 dwellings, short-term lettings, according to the DLA? And while that might not be something for the housing department politically, it's important enough for council. What would be your comments on that?
I didn't know that number, but I'm not surprised because it fits with the pattern we're seeing elsewhere, and it's certainly consistent with this overall picture of the affordable, for the kind of affordable end of the private rented housing sector to be constraining in a way that's making it incredibly difficult for our residents and in turn incredibly difficult for us. As you hinted in your question, there's very little I think that any part of the council can do there from a kind of regulatory point of view. It's a kind of national policy matter. And to a certain extent, what it illustrates is that, unsurprisingly, given what it is, that the private rental market is subject to the vagaries of the market, and the market at the moment is choosing to push more of its supply in this direction, which just means that people looking for a home for their family, or a local authority looking for a home for a family that's struggling to find their own, is not able to shop in that market. It's very hard to see, other than probably what would have to be quite a heavy-handed national bit of regulatory policy, what you can do in the short term to affect that. But it's, as I say, it's consistent with this rather grim picture that we see it.
I'm sure the lead member will join me in welcoming the registration scheme that the government's introduced for short-term lettings in because this problem was identified by the GLA last in February 2019, and I know the problems that we're in the pandemic. And then perhaps you give me a short, it's largely the planning department that's been monitoring this for the council and not yours, but perhaps on behalf of the council you can give me an assurance that you're collectively monitoring the situation and
in terms of short,
yeah,
well, it doesn't come under us in terms of that kind of monitoring. Absolutely, and I think just adding is the rental market for us is very tough. As I say, we've seen increases in terms of rental cost. There's an impact, obviously, in terms of the Airbnbs and the rates that people are now charging on Airbnb. So there's a fact. And what we've also found now is we get increasing competition from other, including government agencies, where they're operating on a budget much better, much higher than our LHA. So we're being outbid on the risks. It is a real concern to us. TA accommodation at affordable rent, and you only have to see the difference between what we're paying and rent and what we get back to see that it's an increasing cost to the council.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson.
So you have 62 households currently on the LLP, and you have about say 400 voids a year. So how long will it take to get those 62 people, 62 households?
So those 400 voids are in the stock across the whole of the borough.
Yes, I know that. So how long will it take? 62, so you're in a smaller area. So I'm saying, how long will it take to actually be able to rehouse people?
It's very hard to predict that because you're operating in a smaller area. You're really waiting, because in some cases some of those households will have very specific needs and may be waiting for some time because of the combination of number of bedrooms and accessibility needs, for example. And so, given the relatively small pool that you're fishing in and local letting plans of the one estate, the answer to that question can vary enormously depending on the household's particular needs. If that makes sense.
So what I think I'm really asking is, by concentrating on a small area and people want to move, does that make things take longer than normally they would be waiting on?
On the table in 4.8, you can see the demographics of that waiting list by bedroom size. The majority of the properties that we have available within Lake West tend to be on the smaller end, studio and 1 bed. So where you can see the 3, 4, 5 beds, those needs within the local letting policy are going to come up very, very infrequently.
Yeah.
Why it's a complicated question to ask is that we're using voids obviously to satisfy the demand of a local lettings policy, and there are actually only 5 people that went additional on that lettings policy over the last month, so it's a smaller number of people applying. But those voids are not only can satisfy somebody under local letting that may be wanting their own home because of overcrowding, but they're also being used to do the decant for the refurbishment. So they're being occupied, so we're switching things around, which is why it's sort of not quite as easy. If you're looking at it purely, if you were just saying, look, we're not going to decant at all, these are all local letting, then, I mean, rough guess, we've probably got about 70 properties within the Lancaster West estate that could be available straight from local letting. But it depends very much on bedroom size.
Also, if I've understood your question right, I think it's important to say that those people who've kind of signed up for the local lettings policy, they haven't signed away their right to potentially move somewhere else in the point of the local letting policy is to prioritise those people for the homes that become available in the estate.
Yeah.
It's not that they don't consequently sign away their right to move anywhere else if somewhere else was to become available to meet their needs.
Thank you.
Councillor Simmons.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask, on point 3.7, page 21, there was the consultation, the review of the policy in 2020. It doesn't seem clear to me that it says there needed to be more effective engagement with Bramley Housing Residents Association, but it's understood that residents supported the continuation. And I just wondered what engagement was there, because I think elsewhere it says it's acknowledged that there needs to be better engagement.
I was going to say, this is 2020 to extend to 23. I'm just looking to see.
I emailed Coach John.
Okay, I wasn't here at the time, so.
I will come to members of the public.
No, sorry, Alton's a member of the team.
Of course, sorry, I couldn't see your part.
Do you remember 2020?
Of course, I couldn't see your part. Carry on.
So the context behind the review was that at that time, from the housing needs of the engagement that was directed with Bramley House wasn't as much as we would like it to be, but it was sort of the Lancaster team did sort of engage with Bramley House. That's my understanding in terms of.
I've got the answer. I've got the email. Perhaps you continue. I can read the email.
And we wanted to acknowledge that. We wanted to acknowledge and not sort of.
Yeah, it's important to acknowledge. I think if things could be improved. And I suppose it's history now, but I would be curious as to why that was, and how we're going to make sure that doesn't happen again.
So you say why it was? In my recollection is that originally the LLP was just going to be Lancaster West, and Bramley House was not by definition part of Lancaster West. But I remember there was representation. I think I came to a meeting with Elizabeth back in those days, and then it was extended to incorporate Bramley House within the scheme.
I'm happy to hear from.
Back in 2019.
Yeah.
I mean, I just think we've acknowledged there's something that could be improved on, and I'm curious as to why that was, but hopefully it will be.
I think Alton and I will confirm this, but I think we're in the territory of oversight rather than deliberate decision, if you see what I mean.
Absolutely. Just an oversight, which we wanted to acknowledge specifically, but also make sure that it doesn't happen.
Thank you. And that leads me on to my final point, which I think also goes to the wider Grenfell rehousing policy. And you mentioned, Kim, that the LLP, Bramley House, was not going to be in the LLP. And for me,
So Bramley House is in the LLP.
it is now, but you mentioned at the beginning it wasn't originally going to be.
Back in 2019, yeah, there was a debate because it was just purely on Lancaster West.
So what's concerning me is how is it that we have residents formerly of the walkways with traumatised children who are not allowed to be in the LLP or the Grenfell housing rehousing policy, and they've only got 100 points after 6 years.
Within the walkways, but the walkways are under category A. Within the walkway. Sorry, the walkways. I was thinking.
So how is this happening to residents? Because that's concerning to me. I mean, I understand the council makes a policy which decides who is and isn't affected, but sadly, trauma doesn't go with the sweep of a pen.
But I think the wider rehousing policy was to facilitate moves for people who wanted to move away from the estate. So by definition, the local lettings plan wouldn't help them because the local lettings plan is about helping people move within the estate.
That's why I'd say this question is relating to both, either or both. However, whichever policy is applying or not, how is it that we have Grenfell affected families from that really close immediate area still in an awful situation and just being left with 100 points at this point in time?
These are people that don't live on the Lancaster West estate.
They did at the night of fire.
They're not eligible to the 900 points.
So
there would be.
How is that?
There would be. Sorry,
Councillor, I think I understand. So are you referring to the children of those who had a tenancy?
I'm referring to adults and children. Some people were 17 and now they're 24.
Yeah.
5.
So the way the policy was drafted, it was for the actual tenants.
Yeah.
Anybody else who was affected had to make a homelessness application, and that is where the 100 points came from. So those residents you're talking about, they to qualify under the provisions of the homelessness under the allocations policy, that is where the 100 points come from. But they don't qualify for those points. So it's only for the tenants in relation to the wider.
So that explains it, but it doesn't satisfy me as to why and what is going to be done to improve that, because I think that's a flaw and quite upsetting flaw in the council's response housing-wise to Grenfell.
Yeah, well, we've had this conversation before, haven't we, Councillor Simmons? And
we have, and I needed to be resolved.
Yeah, okay, well, it's not.
Perhaps that's a conversation we can have.
Will that be in writing or will that?
It will be part of the consultation we're about to have. So it's a comment that's been raised to how we might consider that. So we need to look at it in the roundabout.
Because part of the reason I wanted this on the agenda is because of cases like that, where the council's policy decisions have caused additional trauma and ongoing suffering, serious suffering to people. And I think the council shouldn't, if it has learned any lessons, it shouldn't be continuing to do that at this point.
And I think that's a fair point. I mean, I think the one of the areas that's always sat uncomfortable with me from the beginning, and again it was before my time, is the fact that this area was drawn as an area in terms of refurbishment, improvement, local lettings, wider Grenfell move. By nature, that obviously didn't incorporate a wider area where people clearly had.
That's an important but a separate issue, I think, and that's another conversation perhaps we can have. But I'm personally, not going to say it too strongly, but disgusted by some of the casework I'm seeing in comparison to the comms that the council put out about how it's caring for people. There are people falling through the gaps, and I'm sure that you'd be very concerned to hear that
Well,
we
I'm
want to
sure,
take- we
and
want to
I'm
take
sure you will
rapid
bring it
action.
to us if there are people that bring it to the,
I have
and that's
done.
what
I have done.
Coach is
Thank you.
here to do.
Without, I have done
Thank you.
without resolution, so that's why I brought it to the scrutiny.
Thank you very much, and I think it will be good for the whole committee to be informed about that, so the whole committee can also know what's happening exactly on these points, and I think as a committee, we will come to a point where we have a recommendation for that specific policy. So I would appreciate for the lead member if you can share with us for the whole answer. I'm really eager to go to the members of the public if there is any councillor or any other councillor. Thank you. The floor is yours. Please start with your name and if there is a residents association that you represent, so we can minute the name and the residents association you represent. Please.
So I'm Abbas Sadu, Chair of Lancaster West
Thank you, Abbas.
State Residents Association. Glad to see you all, but still, we are very disappointed. We had to come here. You mentioned it's like all days. Yes, for you guys might be all days. For us, we live on Lanc West. We see the tower every day. We remember it every day. What happened? Our residents lived 10 years through construction work, demolition of the leisure center, building the leisure center, demolishing where the football pitches were. Then they built the KAA. Refurbishment of the tower. Then we had the biggest disaster after World War II. We had to watch 72 people die. Still we live with all those stuff. Nothing has changed from that point of recovery because you can't start recovery while you have the tower there. You have all the construction in the tower. We recently here they had still asbestos coming out of the tower. So all those works are still happening. And we're living through the refurbishment on our estate. So I find it really odd talking about this. This is a policy, many residents have benefited and are still helping a lot with our refurbishment. And now you want to bring more people from hotels. We've already been like a dumping ground on our estate. We have a lot of people suffering mentally, physically, disabled people because that's what the high priority needs coming there. So we already go through a lot of problems. We need to get in touch with police officers many times, sort these issues out. So you want to add more people, then we have to move our residents to hotels. We have residents here, they can't sleep in it most of the time because we have the construction work going on. So we have to use them for respite. So many other needs we have. This is the policy, needs to be there until our refurbishment is done. Thank you.
Can I just double check? So what you're referring is the refurbishment has to be completed first. Is that what you?
Yes, we have. Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Yes.
So I'm Stuart, I'm the Vice Chair of the RA, but I also sit on the refurb subcommittee. In terms of, I heard you talk earlier about losing grant funding because of timeframes. If you get rid of this policy, it takes away our ability to decan, and there are some properties on Lancaster West that are so badly conditioned, there is no option but to decant them because of the work they need, because of the extensive work that needs to be done within the property. Okay, so you're going to put traumatised people that have been through 10 years of, as about 10 years of construction, Grenfell, and now another 3-year construction, and move them into hotels. It's going to be it's not going to be cost efficient for us. It's going to, we're already seeing the high inflation go over budget. This policy was actually one piece of good work the council did after Grenfell with residents that hasn't worked, and it's worked because you finally listened and worked with residents on it. And now you want to get rid of it in when we're not even finished the project that we're actually trying to, that we were the residents were promised after we went through what we went through. I just think this is a mistake. If you vote on this and you get rid of it, you should extend it at least until the project of the refurbish is done. That's just my opinion.
I'm Sam from Lancaster Voices. I also run the Lancaster West football team. I'm Lancaster West for over 15 years. As Stuart said, we've been living next door to a murder scene. Yeah, we've been living in a building site for the last 5.5 years. Yeah, even today I get woken up every day. I've got children next door to me every day, suffering every day. We're still suffering from mental health. But what we saw, and what our children saw that day on the fire, we saw our friends and family burned to death 10, 15 meters away from me. We are a unique case. What has happened to our estate is unprecedented, yeah? So please take that on board.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. My name is Fatima Badavsha. I lived on the estate since I was 11 years old. It's regarding a local lettings plan. Now, I lived in a 3-bedroom and I applied for the local letting plan for free 1-bedroom as I had 2 older children. Sorry, I'm a bit nervous.
Sure.
Anyway,
Take your time.
Sorry?
Take your time,
okay,
please.
Thank you. So anyway, so I applied for the local letting plan way back in 2018, I believe, around about that time. And we got moved to another part of the estate. My daughter got a 1-bedroom, but me and my son, there was only 2 bedrooms available at that time. So they wanted to move us all together. So I got a 2-bedroom and my daughter got a 1-bedroom. To this day, I'm still waiting for my son to be moved out. He's coming up to 30, he's married, and we're still waiting. No transparency. From day one, I've been fighting to find out what's going on. My son's application was lost. And basically, I still don't know where I stand. I don't have a bidding number or anything for him. He suffers from mental health also because of the night of the fire and so forth. But as a young man, there's no evidence to show that he has been suffering from mental health because he doesn't want to go and access the services. So how do I prove? Where do I get the points from for him, being traumatized and going through what he has to go through? So I just don't know. I don't know where I stand. I want him to move out and move on with his life, but the thing is, no one has got back to me. So going back to how long, it's been long, too long. And if you're saying there's 62, where are they? Because I'm seeing empty flats, but I'm seeing new people going into these flats, and I'm like, what's going on here? Why haven't I not been? And I go back to the office, and no one's able to explain to me what's going on. So, hence why I'm here. I too suffer from mental health, and it's very difficult for me to get here. But I came here because I want to know what's going on with my son's application.
Thank you.
And I have spoken to James, and hopefully we'll sort something out soon. And Maxine Holdsworth, back then, promised me this. Now she's back again, and I was hoping that I could speak to her directly, but unfortunately she's not here, so I'm sorry I had to,
No, please, thank you. I'm glad you've done. And the important thing you've said to me is that you've spoken to James, because James is the man to answer all your questions on that, and encourage and keep me informed when your conversations. Thank you.
I think, Fatima, I understand where you're coming from, and I think a lot of local people as well, Sam and as well, Sam. Yes.
So just on one point, because I did forget it, we do have tight time frames.
Yes.
In terms of the government funding and the funding around the Carbon Zero funding that, again, council and residents work together to lose that would be all, we just wasted our time as residents working with you.
We still haven't made a decision what's going to happen to the tower. The community still hasn't made a decision for what's going to happen to the tower. We're still going to have to suffer through that as well. We've been suffering for 5.5 years. Yeah, we've been living next door to a murder scene, like I said earlier on, and the building site for the last 5.5 years. Our children have to see that building. We had debris all over the flat. Our windows never got cleaned for 3 years. 3 years later, that's when the windows got cleaned. They said to us the debris was fine. Our kids were picking up debris from the floor. Now we're hearing fire brigades have got cancer. This is very worrying for the estate, sir. Okay?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we should answer 3. Fatima, you
Sorry,
want to come back before
can I
we
just quickly
address.
just finish off?
Yes.
So going back, my son's application being signed in 2018, if they were to change the policy on the local lettings plan, does it change the people that are already on there?
I'm surprised we have to argue that we're a unique case. It's weird.
It shouldn't,
It's weird. We shouldn't be there.
change. I think the people that are already on the list should, still got,
Like Abba said, this is the worst situation since World War II. You lot are treating us like we're nothing. I'm sorry.
Sam, I understand your point, and in fact,
Thank you very much.
fire, I have seen it.
Thank you very much.
I don't need to feel anything else. I exactly seen the night as I've seen it. And I understand the drama you're going through, and it affects the whole area. And the council should be taking care of every requirement, but still, human beings have shortcomings, but we have to come here and
It's an old case, move on. Have the time for move on.
You made it.
Move on. We can't move on, Chair.
Thank you. You made it to come here, and I'm sure the lead member responsible for housing is here. I will respond to Fatima. Your case, this committee does not specifically talk about individual case, but now you've mentioned on recorded. I'm sure you've mentioned James.
Yeah, but
the lead member is here.
but-
I'll finish with this
Oh, I'm
point.
so sorry.
And I hope your situation will be sorted and solved out because of the drama that every community, whether it's Lancaster West or the whole north of North Kensington is going through. I'll give you the last minute before the lead member comes to the point.
Right.
I will answer 3 questions in a go, and then I'll come back to you.
Sorry, I just saw this gentleman, Dan Hawthorne, you were nodding. So are you saying that it's going to, if the new changes in the local letting plan, is that going to apply to the people that are already on there? Or?
So the one thing that I want to make really clear, thanks for the opportunity, is that we haven't come here with a proposal. You know, what we've got in front of us, we said we promised we'd do a review, and so what we're doing is a review. We come to review with a genuinely open heart. So I want to reassure you, because you were worried that we'd kind of effectively were coming here with a proposal to end it, and that's certainly not what we're saying. We're here, you know, one of the reasons we wanted to have this conversation was to understand where people were coming from. One of the options, exactly as you said, I mean, there's a kind of extreme option at one end, which is we end the local lettings policy and everyone else who's been waiting just becomes kind of in part of the normal system. There's another option which is to carry it on. There are other options kind of in the middle, which include what you're describing, where you could close it at some point to new entrant, but maintain the rights of people you already mentioned. I was nodding because we recognise that is one of our options. It's no more or less in favour than the others at the moment. We're trying to just map out the territory. Does that make sense?
And the questions you've raised in terms of the project should be finished first, to be allowed time to finish the project. Any response on that? What Abbas mentioned, and I think.
I think that's, again, it's something which we need to consider, because a very strong message we're getting is linking the local lettings plan to decanting and what's going on the estate. And actually, they're 2 separate things. One is a local lettings plan to allow people to move, you know, which is not providing accommodation for decant, and the other one is a decant. So maybe that's something which we could look and consider. You know, if the importance is to have the space available for people to move around, then that's something we could look at. But I suppose theoretically, what you could do is you could have lots of people who eventually reach an age of majority where they're entitled to their own home, who will be taking up the empty units that you would ordinarily be using for the refurbishment. I think that's one of the considerations.
James, can you answer the specific question about what we're currently looking at in terms of the timescales of the refurbishment? I mean, for example, if we did extend to the end of the refurbishment, how long would that be from now?
Very much chime with Councillor Ross's question. I think based on the pace we've got at the moment of the 62, and it also answers your question, just because for once the programmes are live, you're probably looking at 3 to 4 years. We would be able to house the vast majority of homes. I want to be absolutely clear that 6 households who, because of the archetypes in Lancaster West, we will never be able to house in all likelihood within that sort of time scale, but something like a 3 to 4 year period, I think, would mean that we would be able to provide homes for the vast majority of people still on the waiting list and overcome all the challenges and seize the opportunities of the refurbishment.
David.
David from the
followed by Councillor Simmons.
Okay, David from the Lancaster West Residents Association. It was just to reiterate that I don't think you can just say that this is all finished after 5 years and that the trauma has gone away and that anyone is in any position. And to be quite honest, I've talked to so many people who weren't even aware of what was going on with the local lettings panel, that there were options available to them. So I think it would be really overtly premature to close the scheme now and to close it to new entries now, because as far as I can see, people are still trying to decide where they need to be, what they need, and they've been spending the last 5 years dealing with the trauma that happened to them on the night, and the traumas have been happening since. And you've heard from everyone speaking here how much that it's been important to them that's been a local letting scheme and how important it is for the future of the estate, because we won't be able to finish doing the refurbishment of the estate without the ability to decant people. If you think that moving people from hotels to then move another load of people on the estate back out into hotels makes any sense at all, I don't think that doesn't stack up to me at all, and is simply not saving a penny for the council. So I mean, I'd just ask you to be really considered before you make any changes to local letting.
80% of the residents are felt for hotels who are in hotels during the tragedy. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fine. Yes, Sammy, I'll come back to you. Sorry, I've noticed you're putting your hand.
So hi, I'm Tasha. I live on Lancaster.
Kim, I think you would know that taking the LLP away would be such a bad thing. I moved under the LLP and had so many conversations and emails back and forth with Kim because I was in one of the worst situations on the estate. If that LLP wasn't there, I would probably still be in one of the flats with no heating and no hot water, which I went through for over 3 years after the fire. There's other people on that estate that they're in such bad situations. The LLP is there to help them. You're going to take it away. What are you going to do for these people? Because if it wasn't for the LLP, I would still be stuck in that flat, having radiators delivered Christmas Eve because there was no heating. It's ridiculous. It's an absolute joke. Like, you guys, you want to take it away? Come and live on the estate. Go into one of the Decanic properties, one of the empty flats in there, see how you lot feel.
We've got a temporary
We're waking
boiler.
up
We've got a
every
temporary
morning,
boiler.
and it's not just the refurb that is still going on. You've got the entrance to the site. You have people with mental health issues that are making our mental health even worse because it's not being dealt with. Like, there's so much going on that estate. Taking a lifeline as the local lettings policy away is really bad for it to be even reconsidered. Deal with the tower first. Make sure everything is fine. Deal with people's mental health first. Then take it away. You can't do it in between people just starting to try and get back to something with normality. Nearly 6 years later. It's ridiculous.
I'll come back to you, sir. Sorry, I've given you before a chance. Sammy.
Hi, my name is Sammy. I'm going to speak as the chair of Browning House, but I'm also, given what we're talking about, I'm going to speak as a public policy consultant and having been in housing since 2014. I share Lancaster West RA sentiments. It's an absolute disappointment that the extension or non-extension of these policies on the table. 3 years later, we should talk about and look at cases like Hughes Fatima, where we're looking at the actual policy and looking at the impact, character and quality impact assessment, look at people who are the children, the leaseholders whose children have been displaced, but do not start looking at whether to extend it or not. That's the wrong approach to it. I'm going to ask two questions. The first one, it's a request for an amendment to the officer's report, specifically the reference to Browning House or the non-engagement with Browning House, which is at 3.7 of the report. Actually, I've got an email from the officer dated 1st of July 2020, which explained what took place. That's Rob Shaw, I'm sure you know. He said, I accept and agree that far more consideration should have been made to engage directly with the residents of Browning House on the extension to the LLP. I personally apologize for this omission, and I'd be extremely mindful of this going forward. So I request that we amend the records in that report, that it was actually an omission. There was no attempt to engage either with us as an RA or with our residents. That's my first.
Can we agree that?
We will come to that.
The second point, I just wanted to remind the committee, because I read the report. We don't have confidence in this review. It is going to be biased. An experience of casework, not only in Browning House, Lancaster West Estate, and other properties in residents in North Kensington, is that we seem to tend to go towards the pre-Grenfell housing authority attitude, talking to us about the 3,000 people on the waiting list, asking us to justify the commitment, namely the commitment to rehouse Browning House residents and the Walkways residents within the borough, where we have to almost beg or try and show evidence, while we still have people who've been shifted as far as parking and nobody cares about it. So I just wanted to remind you as a committee that section 166A, 6B, gives actually the power to this authority to decide that a particular type of people, like the residents of the Walkways and us in Browning House, have specific circumstances. And as long as there's evidence for a need, then this local lettings plan, you can have a local lettings plan, you're not in breach of your statutory obligations. Now, if we go to 3.3, it says for the background of this policy, it's specifically for the recovery. Now, when you talk about consideration, I've not seen a report about our recovery. So unless we all recover, I don't know why we're here. Why are we talking about the extension of this policy or not? Where is the evidence? The need is still there unless you know something that we don't.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You've raised a good point. Sir, you want
I'm just going to say one more thing, and this is just on the culture change that RBKC keeps putting out, that it wants to become the best council, one that listens to its residents. You've got all your residents here that have come here specifically to tell you how bad this will be if you decide to stop it. And I'll be honest, if you decide to stop it, I'm not going to listen to one more bit about culture change, because all it is going to be is the same old RBKC not listening to us. This was, as I said, it's worked because it was done jointly.
We shouldn't be here.
You have to remember how dignified we have been since the tragedy, yeah? We have to stop riots from coming to the state, yeah? We have to stop so many things from escalating. We've been dignified and been silent for 5.5 years.
Thank you. Thank you. This is exactly the kind of platform where you can raise your views, and the leadership are the ones who make the decisions. We as a scrutiny committee do recommendations and consult with the leadership and pass your views, and I'm sure you will understand that. We're not decision makers, but we can suggest and bring your voice to the table. Councillor Simmons.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to say, I think we've heard tonight very, very clearly, very clear message from, and it's unanimous. So I wonder whether our recommendation should be that we remove from the options under number 6, we should remove the option 3, which is to end it.
Option 3.
There's going to be a consultation, there's a time frame at the end of the report. But as when I referred to the previous consultation about the houses, it wasn't every option on the table. You didn't get an option to say no. But I think at this point tonight, we've all heard very, very clearly that option 3 shouldn't even be on the table, and that it's actually caused some distress to see it there. So I would suggest our recommendation should be to remove that number 3.
Thank you. If the committee agrees, then we can hear from the lead member.
I think we need to hear from the lead member what his thoughts are on taking forward the whole consultation.
Sorry, Kim, before you start. Please, the gentleman. Yes.
Stand up, because I'm not very tall.
Please, no, carry on.
I never supported the accommodation.
Actually, start with your name, sir.
John Lawson. I'm a rep. Supported the housing with Church House.
Thank you.
Very close proximity to Grenfell Tower. A lot of big black pieces of black candy floss were going to I witnessed the fire. I haven't had a good night's sleep since, and I'm grateful for the Grenfell support. I've just been referred from my doctor after an X-ray to a clinic in Hammersmith for asbestosis. Asbestos in the lungs. Until they monitor my condition, I won't know if I've got 10 weeks or 10 years to live. I would like to make the point for the old people supported housing. It could be improved. Big people get old too, would you believe? And there's some people there that the accommodation is very small, very. It doesn't refer to any sort of anthropomorphic data that has been available since I read an architect's journal 50 years ago. For instance, this here at 60 inches, that's a tummy circle for a wheelchair. And that doesn't apply anywhere in the building. And some people are ill owing to medical conditions and they're living in a very cramped accommodation. I think it could be improved. There is likely asbestos. There is likely asbestos in Witcher's house. They're working on the law that time for fire breaks. Architect ceilings quite often contain as best I know. If, could anything be done for the old people?
Thank you very much. We'll continue to be very soon.
Could you do some new builds that they have to answer the more data?
To answer briefly the question, I'm sure the lead members, it's also the adults of social care need as well as the housing. So we will have to ask the lead member to respond to that, also to get the lead member relevant for adult social care. I think that was also another department which we need to hear from. I'm sure the lead member will respond to that, and he will answer now as you hear. So thank you for coming.
So, on the New Rail Bill programme we've just been talking about, our 600 homes. Included in that are a number of specific homes aimed at older people. Because we recognise that this is a really big problem. It's growing and growing and growing as far as providing suitable accommodation.
People are getting bigger.
Yeah. And within all of our developments, we're trying to put accessible properties because most people don't need care homes in terms of nursing, but they do need something suitable for our old age. So the answer is in our programme.
All the fire doors and frames were replaced. And they're a lovely job, but you could have just made the doors a tiny bit wider. I mean, there's a lady there, and she has to get out of her wheelchair. They nurse her through the door, and then she gets back in her wheelchair. This is a door to a main lounge at the building.
Anyway, thank you again. Yeah.
If it's a specific issues like the lady you just mentioned, it would be good maybe to take the details, and the relevant officers will be dealing with specific issues, and hopefully we'll come back to you for specific residents. You mentioned like the wheelchair use and can't get through because of the doors not wide enough for the wheelchair. But I'm sure officers will be in touch with you, and while you're here, we will hopefully get someone to take on as a case and deal with the local councillor as well as the department that's in charge. But thank you. Is there any other question on that front?
Can I just add something to that?
Yes, I just hasn't
I'm
finished.
the ward councillor.
Oh, you're the ward councillor.
So
Excellent.
I'll speak to you afterwards and we'll take that up.
Excellent.
I plan to email you.
Yeah.
I would like to.
Thank you very much. I hope
There
that
was a policy at one point where these studio flats could be knocked together, get void and going to be knocked together, so that provide more suitable accommodation. I mean, I realise there's a housing shortage. I realise that.
No, thank you. I mean, we have, obviously, the council has housing challenges, but at the same time, it's also have the duty to make homes fit for human habitation, where all the people who need the support will be offered the support they need. And your local councillor is here, and she's just answered, and hopefully will be in touch. If there's any further information for this select committee, then we can take it forward. But it will be a specific.
We do that.
Yeah.
But just remember,
you
60 inches, wheelchair don't exactly.
You can do that,
Keep
and
that in mind. That's a good reference.
and you're always welcome to come back here to ask questions. But hopefully there will be no need for to come back, and the case will be held. Councillor, do you want to final comment on this?
Chance would be a
No,
fine
that's
thing
all
on
I
that.
wanted to say. But if you stick around, I'll come and have a word with you at the end and we'll have a chat.
Thank you. On the point of the removing 3, I'll come to that. Select committee members will probably need to know more details about it. Councillor Ross, you want to say something, or you were agreeing on what?
No, I've just I thought we were going to make a resolution.
Yeah.
And then we went somewhere else, so I just wondered where we were on that.
Okay, thank you. The gentleman was to ask a quick question, and he was here for a long time, so I had to prioritize him to ask you the question. Councillor Hammond, you have to say something?
Yes, it was the thought of making a recommendation about removing option 3. Of course, it's not our consultation, and I mean, we've heard from 8 residents and everybody who's spoken has looked out one direction, and I think we all personally sympathetic to that. But it is this is what we heard from Dan, a theoretical consultation. So the idea that at one end of the spectrum you end up going right now, and at the other end you keep it going indefinitely. I think that's what I heard from Dan, and then there's all sorts of options in the middle. So I'm just wondering, before we go down the route of making recommendations as a committee, where you're going next, where you're thinking of going next, now that we've heard this discussion tonight.
We wanted to have this conversation at the start of the review, if you see what I mean. So we really are, as I say, kind of open-minded about what it is. There are a kind of range of different options in the middle. I guess the other thing to say is that it's absolutely right. The voices we've heard tonight, and there's clearly very strong support for maintaining it. And the job that Councillor Taylor-Smith has with kind of our advice and based on the hearing is to weigh that against the pressures of people who are living in unsuitable accommodation, in temporary accommodation, other people who might otherwise be able to benefit from nomination of their homes in this state. That at its crudest is the trade-off that's being decided here. And it's really, the case has been made very strongly tonight for why the residents of Lancaster West are a kind of special case, and that was of course why the lettings plan was introduced in the first place. And so the question boiled down to its simplest is that special case still such that that trade-off should go in that direction, if you see what I mean, and that's the balance to make. And we the commitment we made was to do a review which we consult on, which is why we're here, if you see, which is why, as it were, these options are on the table, not because we made up our mind, but simply because we made a commitment to do a transparent review. So that's why it's here. But that's to boil it down to its simplest. That's the decision that was in front of us when we first introduced the LLP and made that decision. And on every subsequent review, that's the same trade-off.
Can I just add a little bit to that? And I am going to address you guys because you're most important people. I mean, so let me just start by reminding you. I started off by saying this has been a fantastic success. So, and I remember when we put it in place, and I thought it was great. We'd never done a local, as a council, we've never done a local letting policy before. But it was obviously there to support the residents, and it has been a success. And if I look down at the needs, the majority of the 55, in fact 36 of the 55, has all been about overcrowding, the moving. That's where it has been a great success. The well-being aspects of rehousing temporary accommodation, which you reviewed as a small number. But we had a review back in 2020, and we decided to move it forward again for 3 years. It was the right thing to do, and I think it's absolutely right that we look at it again now. And I think I've got a very, very strong, we've been very clear in terms of what your feeling is towards the local letting policy and why that is important. It's absolutely right that we do a proper review of this because there are other forces that we do have to consider as a council. And what's interesting is we haven't talked about any of them today, which is the issue of how many people we've got in a hotel at the moment.
90.
90 people we now have in a hotel. And we have 2,100 people in temporary accommodation, and we have best part of 1,500 people who are asylum seekers. Everybody looking for a home. And that's what the pressure I have to obviously think about in terms of what's clearly a really good policy that you've articulated and why it's important for you. And I'm not arguing with that. But other factors as well. What we want to do is to listen to those voices, listen to the recommendation, Mr. Chairman, from the committee, what views of the committee, and then come back with a considered view. But I don't think it would be right for us to short circuit that review here at today's meeting based upon what we have
I don't think that's what's been proposed, but yes.
Well, I mean, you're saying a very strong requisition of taking out options. So,
well, I think
so
if
to a certain
one person
extent,
still needs this for their recovery, they should have it.
Yeah.
And we've got more than one person here.
Yeah.
And we've also heard the distress that it's caused to people in their recovery to even have that on the table. And that's why I'm putting that forward as a suggestion for a recommendation that the committee may wish or may not wish to make.
One thing is clear, I'll come to you. One thing is clear, I understand the need and the pressures from other forces, including asylum seekers who've been here, whether it's from Ukraine or Afghanistan or any reason. The people that have been affected specifically by the tower and the surrounding community is, it's been impacted a lot, and it should be exception to other forces. Yes, I understand maybe 5 years, 6 years, it could be 10, 20 years down the road. People may still feel the pressures, people may still feel impacted by what happened. And I think that is important for this committee to consider that the issue, as well as whether it's amendment, as was been suggested under the 3.7, somebody mentioned, as well as removing the 3, could be taken forward as a committee. But it's important for the decision makers to acknowledge that the impact the local community had on this issue is no other than anyone else. So it's exceptional, and that has to be noted as it is.
And Mr. Chairman, I agree with what you're saying, but how do you define community? Because at the moment we're defining community as Lancaster West and Stanley. How do you define that? Which maybe part of the decision should be to incorporate other on a wider area. I mean, you know, so these are really complex things. But we've got a very clear message from our residents today with regard to what they believe is the right thing to do.
I agree. What I'm defining the community is the community sitting in front of me now. That is what I see as a community. And if I see another members of the community have another agenda, another issues, then we can talk about it as a community. But the community now, as referring as the general housing community, select community, is the community sitting right in front of us and talking to us and raising their issues, which needs to be heard and should be heard by the leadership as well as the members of council. Before I move on, I'll come back to you. You've raised another point. Any other one who hasn't spoken, any other member of the community who hasn't spoken, I won't have an issue, question. No. Okay. Well, sorry. I haven't spoken. She hasn't spoken. So please, let me talk. Yes, please. Can you start with your name if you don't mind, please?
My name is Zakia. I'm one of the residents in Barrington Ward, Lancaster West. Addressing to Mr. Kim, you see, just a while ago, you mentioned about salon stickers, this, that, the right. Of course, that's an important fact. But you see, Granville, Kensington, Chelsea, you see, Lancaster West. You shouldn't put those things on our shoulders. We already have too much to bear and walk. All right. There are other ways, other places you can do it, not on our shoulder. We can't bear it. Try it yourself.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Valid point. Samia, we're coming to the conclusion of this agenda.
Very quickly.
That gentleman will be the last.
Very quick. I'm just going to make it a bit easier for everyone. I think we start these meetings with 72-second silence.
Yes.
I haven't heard anything about not having the need for that particular policy. We hear about other consideration, fair enough. It's a very simple question. Is there a need for it or not? And unless we're mistaken, unless there was a miraculous recovery, we need it. And it's the most horrible time right now. So I'm going to propose something for your consideration. You want to review this policy. What's the urgency? You can come back in 6 months. What's the urgency now is not by expanding it or not. It's people like Fatima. It's people who are in the walkways, who are in Hammersmith and Fulham barking. So I'm going to suggest that you put on hold this review, look at this policy and the people who are currently excluded and the impact this is having on them. Because we need to have some fairness, and we haven't had fairness for people who have been equally traumatized, who are residents of Lancaster West on the night of the fire, the walkways or Browning House, who are excluded because they had to go the other route. So that is the urgency right now. It's not about whether to extend it. We don't have to decide to look at that now. What's the urgency to decide whether to continue with it or not?
Thank you. Final comment on this.
I'm just going to come back to your point in terms of whether it gets dismissed or indefinite. We've never asked for it indefinite. We've asked for it while it's needed. Everyone that's spoken here hasn't used the word indefinitely like we're a special case. We are a special case because of what we went through. There's never been a fire like that since the fire of London. Do you know what I mean? 72 people that me, Sammy, Tasha grew up with. I was born into this community. I was raised on Grenfell. Do you know what I mean? I lost friends in Grenfell, people that I'd known my entire life. You know, I had bipolar. It affected my mental health. It does till this day. Do you know what I mean? What I'm saying is there's still traumatised people, and then you want to offset them where their support networks are and put them in hotels. I get there. I worked in housing for a homeless charity, St Mungo's, as a support worker. I know the need for housing. I understand that, but there's still a massive need for this.
Thank you.
There's one more thing. You have to remember, the majority of the state still look at the council as murdering our neighbours, our family, and our people. Yeah, you have to remember, Grenfell Tower is part of Lancaster West Estate. If you lived in 137 Grenfell Tower, it's like I live in Hurstway Walk, so 222 Hurstway Walk, Lancaster West Estate. 223 Grenfell Tower, Lancaster West Estate. We were one estate. We were one community. We share the same shop. We share the same schools. We share everything together. So please take that on board.
Thank you very much for that. Before we come to the final bit, is there any comments from the select committee members on this? Okay. We understand what the residents want and what they suggest in terms of the time, in terms of the urgency, in terms of the amendment to specifically mention under the 3.7 where the amendment is required and removal. What is the way forward from here? We've had the comments, lead member for housing and the lead of the council. We could well be in a position to give the recommendation, but we want to hear from you more. And what is the next step? And with the views of the residents who are here today be taken on board and heard and move forward with the situation. Final comments on that.
I think my final comment is that what we've had here is like a mini consultation, which is really what we're trying to do as far as the local letting policy is concerned. I mean, and I've heard a range of things in terms of, obviously, there's a very strong feeling that we should continue and extend the policy for the reasons I think you've outlined. I'm slightly, Sammy is suggesting that maybe we should look at the overall fairness of the system, or have I got that wrong?
No, that's why excluded, because your policy, when you write a policy, it has an impact on people.
What do you mean by excluded? Excluded by not being on the Lancaster West Estate?
No,
or
being
just...
on the walkways,
Okay.
on the night of the fire,
Okay, right.
for not being eligible to go on the local elections plan, and these people are suffering.
Okay, which I think was the point you were making as well. Okay, so I've got that. I think what I don't want to do, Mr. Chairman, is to give you an indication of having heard everything. Clearly, there's a very strong message that's been given to us, and I think we just register that. But we need to go away because I do believe this needs to be properly considered and then brought back it will be back as a decision, which will go through to the leadership, which will be a public meeting.
When will that be leadership?
Well, I don't want to make any commitments yet because one thing, we've heard some very strong opinions actually, I'm really pleased that some people have to come, but still there'll be plenty more people when they're on the estate and elsewhere who have strong views about this, and we need to make sure that we hear all those voices as well. And I'm nervous right now putting a timetable on that before we've mapped out kind of, we wanted to come to you very early with this, but
July 23.
Well, yeah.
Decision, the final decision, July 23. There is a time frame.
That's our current indicative time. This is a decision which should not be current, and so we will work to that if we can. The more important thing is us feeling satisfied and everyone else affected by the policy feeling satisfied that we've heard all the voices before a decision is made. If that makes sense.
So that's a tentative date. It's not the precise date.
Well, it's our indicative project time at the moment, but we're certainly reserving the right to change that if we think, for example, that we need more time.
I mean, the policy is set to expire in November.
Okay.
So we got a bit of time.
So we will be hearing from you, and the members of the public who are here now will get the final decision, or whatever you decide as the leadership. Then they can have their input before that. Is that how it works?
Absolutely, there'll be plenty more chance for people to have an input into the consultation process.
So the decision will not be rushed in that sense.
Certainly not, and this is by no means the only chance for people to express their views.
I have Councillor Simmons and Councillor Gardner on board. Abbas, one more.
I think it's clear and we know the urgency about this matter. It's not you guys keep opening our old wounds, and we want to work on to heal. And we have the tower there. We have a lot of things happens, and you guys well aware of the situation there. We have situation with Memorial Commission, we have situation with the government. Grenfell was on the news all day yesterday. Michael was talking about it. This is something for us living day by day with the tower. Yeah. And you guys keep coming, we want to consult about this. We are already fatigued about consultation. Why you want to talk about it? We know this is a necessity for our estate, for Bramley. Look, likes of Samuel, like us, many of us, we already have a lot to do for a lot of people just for free, just because we care about people. Yes, I am a proud asylum seeker myself, but our capacity is already full. We're dealing with a lot of issues on our state. Yesterday was Sunday, you had a neighbor coming through your balcony because somebody else used the guy, locked the door, David had to let the whatever was happening through his balcony. We're dealing on a daily basis with so many other issues.
Thank
You bring other people, like Zakia said, on our shoulder because we care about people, we have to care about them and we will care about them. But how much we have to pick up the big pieces because you guys don't do your job properly and everything falls on our shoulders and then you keep coming and talking, okay, we want to talk to you about this, talk to you about that. This policy is working. It is a legacy. Kim should be proud of it. You guys should be proud of it. Let's carry on doing it. Once refurbishment is done, everything is sorted. Yes, come and take it.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner, I will come to that point and I will have my own recommendation as the chairman of this committee. Councillor Gardner.
So firstly, thank you very much. I personally taken a lot away from that. My point is about paragraph 8, where you talk about consult. And I would like to ask that you give extra weight to the residents of Lancaster Waite, West Estate and Bramley House. Because otherwise, you have that, in that list, you do have competing interests. And I think it's quite important that actually the residents, some of whom you've heard tonight, actually carry the weight, extra weight in your review of that piece of paper.
Thank you. On a final note, we will hear from the leadership, and from what I'm gathering from the committee members, there will be, and from the senior officers and the leadership as well, there will be no rush to this, and residents will be heard. I once again thank you for your time for coming. If things go sideways, I hope not, but everyone will be in agreement. I will be calling this agenda item on the next meeting just for an update, which is the 27th of March this year, into number 5, roughly, if things doesn't work out. And then your voice will be heard, and this is what scrutiny is about. And I hope by then your voices will be heard, and the leadership and the senior officers will take your points that you've raised tonight on board. And once again, thank you very much and for your coming, and hope to see you another day in our better conditions.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, can I just have a quick comfort break?
Please, yes. Should we have a 5 minutes?
That's all I'm saying.
5 minutes for what can I just, for your attention, we are on live stream. While we're taking a 5 minutes break, we'll be still live stream. Just sadly to say, if we can't stop it, if we stop it, we can't restart it again. So as the chair, I'm correctly informing 5 minute break, and then hopefully we will drive on the rest of the meeting. Thank you again for coming.
Very.
All right. Okay. Good to see you. And you have to see you.
How are you doing? You are? Yeah, yeah. Will you do a marathon? No, half marathon to start with. Marathon's different. Harris marathon. Oh, well, you are on the yeah.
Thanks to do long
We're on the stream. I was just saying, how are you? I was got the sinus thing. Just careful.
Here we are. First one, Councillor Freer. We had a strong briefing. Yeah. Further
Thank you again. That was a good 5 minutes conflict break. We are now moving to the next agenda item. This agenda item, once again, a welcome back to the Select Committee meeting. There was a consultation in the last year. Oh, is it? Okay, back to you. I think let's just, we have moved around, so we just go back to, yep. A4, actually, that's the right one. After a long one, we missed that one, so we'll come back to the refugees and asylum seekers. And I'm sure most of you, we had this agenda item last year. What program, isn't it? Right, we had we looked at it last year.
Yes, we did.
And this is the second term, and happy to hear from the leadership any progress being done and the latest information on this. I will have a question, and I'm sure select committee members will have a question as well as other councillors.
Thank you. So I'm just
Councillor
getting a
Taylor
scribble
Smith.
note from Kojo telling me what I'm not allowed to say.
Councillor Taylor Smith, absolutely welcome. Floor is yours.
So, again, short introduction. So, I'm really proud again, I think, what our borough is doing, and particularly also the outreach, the housing outreach team, and Bella can talk a little about in terms of supporting, you know, people who've now found their home in RBKC in different statuses. And we're providing, you know, a lot of support in terms of social care, schooling, access to GPs, etc., while the government machine goes through to work out, you know, in terms of settling the various cohorts. So I think, you know, as a council, we're doing very much everything that's asked from us and more. In terms of numbers, I mentioned it on our last paper, is that we currently, you'll see if you add up from the table, we've got 1,462 across the three various school boards, which is an incredible number. And if you look at the epicentre of asylum seeker accommodation, which is Earl's Court, again, we've got a very high number of people concentrated in a very small area, and that itself brings challenges. I think the limiting factor for us, I mean, there's an element in terms of funding, you know, because in varying degrees, the displaced people we have varying levels of support. From the asylum seekers, it's £8 a week for the clothes that they had on when they arrived. So, and that's something, just to say, we've been trying to do our best to here. So, really, in terms of dealing with that, it all comes down to a bit of a balance of how we're supporting the asylum seekers and how are balancing the needs of our residents within the borough. And I think that's probably it. I think
the only thing I'd add, which really amplifies what Councillor Smith has said, is that of these three categories, probably the one that's causing us most anxiety at the moment is the asylum seeking category. Partly because it's the largest number, but more because overall it's a group about whom we know much less. They have a higher kind of degree of vulnerability. They are in generally lower quality accommodation for a less clear period of time, and we have much less support, funding support from the government to fund that support that we are giving them. And so I think it's probably also the case that based on our experience and the information we're able to get so far, we can kind of see how the other, you know, we can see the how we can resolve the situations within the cohorts and what the kind of route out might be. With that cohort, I think they're maybe not the specific individuals, but the use of these hotels for this purpose, I think, is for the medium term. It's kind of we need a better system for managing this than we've got at the moment. So I need this for a while.
Thank you. I will, yes, Councillor Ross, please. I will have a question, but you go first.
Two questions. One general, really to do with the sort of density of asylum seekers, etc., in the Earl's Court area. We're kind of seeing there are, I think it was in this report, but there were two more. I think the Home Office was getting two more properties, and I think I know, you know, maybe I'm not allowed to say, but I think I kind of know where at least one of them is. So, I mean, that, obviously, you don't really have any control over that, but it is, we all know, having an effect in Earl's Court. So that's one just observation, really. And the second is a specific question about the Ukrainians. Because mostly they're there for 6 months. Then what happens at the end of the 6 months? And I also know someone personally where a placement hasn't really worked very well. So, I mean, that's going to happen anyway. But even if it is working well, what happens when it comes to an end?
So I mean, on the first point, you're absolutely right that the decisions that the Home Office and their agent Clear Springs take to use accommodation this way is completely out of our control.
Yeah.
What we can do and what we do, of course, is make sure that they completely understand the context in which they might be doing that and the impact it might have on local services' ability to support those people, and so that at the very least they are making informed decisions about that. And just on your point, it's right, and Councillor Taylor-Smith referred to it too. We deliberately try in these public environments to avoid naming the specific locations where people are for kind of community cohesion reasons. I hope you understand. But certainly at the level we can talk about it. It's a question of influence rather than control, I think, on the decisions that are made there. On the Ukrainians, and I might know a bit more about this, although just from a kind of housekeeping point of view, the staff who are supporting the Ukrainians are based in a different directorate of the council who we work closely with, but they're not here tonight. But any questions that we can't answer, we can certainly take away and get answers to. But I think I'm right in saying that you're absolutely right. Those kind of in-home placements after 6 months. And of course, there is an opportunity, as long as both sides agree, to then extend for a further period. But there is the risk, and as you say, we know of cases where it's happened, where either for a kind of breakdown or just because for one reason or another it's not working, one side or the other or both will decide not to extend. In that situation, the first port of call will always be to try and find another placement. So the council is constantly putting out a call for families who might be prepared to take a placement, a new placement. The other important thing to say, and this is true of the Afghan cohort as well, though not of the asylum seeker cohort, is that the Ukrainians who've come to the UK under these official schemes have kind of immigration status, which gives them access to the homelessness system. So they do also have the option as a kind of in extremis, and it's very much as a last resort. This is not what we encourage or want. But they do have access to the system, and if they present to COJO's team as homeless, we would process their homeless applications with the UK system. And that is true of the Afghans as well, but not the asylum seeking cohort. But we the team based on Children's are working really hard to avoid that happening. Partly because it's not a good outcome for the family, and of course partly because it puts strain on the system, which is already under massive strain in terms of the mainstream parenting system.
So just to say, we have had some applications.
Right.
We're trying to minimise it. Yeah. Because of the problem.
And I think just also to add, it's quite interesting, there's no pattern to how allocations are happening in London either. And then we believed it's all really about availability, and Earl's Court happens to be an epicentre because it's got an awful lot of empty hotels in it. I mean, there are some local authorities who are trying to work those through that we believe have no asylum seekers at all, and others who have got a lot more than we have.
So we could develop the hotels into something else.
Councillor Gardner. Do you have any? Okay, yes, Councillor Gardner.
3.8, you talk about having focused on supporting families to access PRS, so private rented sector. I was wondering if you talk about what sort of success rates you've had.
So that group refers to the Afghan evacuees that we have in our 1 million Bridget Hotel. And so that pathway, I think it mentions in the paper, was introduced in September. So since September, we've been working with families, obviously at the Christmas period. To date, we've supported 16 families to sign tenancies, working with organisations, again, that are mentioned in the paper, like Beam and the West London Out London scheme, as well as just supporting families on a one-to-one basis to look for private rented properties via Zoopla, Rightmove, things like that. And so, yeah, 16 families that we've supported to sign a tenancy since September.
Can I ask, are you having a problem with landlords coming forward to agree to those schemes, or are they quite willing?
Most landlords that we've approached, and the outreach team have kind of supported guests to approach landlords, have been very receptive. I think sometimes because they know that we're working with families, there's an element of assurance. The pathway allows us to kind of pay deposits and incentives and things like that. So that funding from central government has been really useful to kind of secure those properties and provide some assurance to landlords. Also, wherever that property is, the receiving local authority is also eligible for 3 years of resettlement funding, so that family can move, and if that local authority accepts, there's a pot of funding that can be tapped into to ensure that tenancy is kind of sustained over the 3-year period. So on the whole, everyone's been really receptive, which has been positive.
It's probably a safer than average bet.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Thank you. Just quickly on 4.9. 4.9, as we can see here, 56 homeless presentations for Ukrainian households, and 30, in fact 28 of them have been rehoused or accommodated. I would like to know that what are the figures compared to the Afghans? Now we can see 50% of the Ukrainians lost. And follow-up question to that will be: we understand the stress families go through when they are in hotels or homeless. What is the council is doing to lobby for the government for the long-term settlement? Because children go in different schools, different areas. It's complicated. What is the council doing for the long-term support to really get rehoused properly and permanently, whether it's inside our council, or anywhere else, or even further afield? I would like to know that urgently because it's important for the long-term settlement.
I can answer that, Councillor. So with the 28 households who have been accommodated, that's in temporary accommodation, that's not rehousing. So they've made homelessness application. We're still assessing their case. So they become part of the homelessness cohort that we've got in temporary accommodation, which is over 2,000. With the Afghan evacuees, if memory serves me correct, I think we had 3 homelessness applications because there were 2 schemes that was available. The government was trying to incentivise them to go down the routes of the schemes rather than make homeless applications because that was deemed a better outcome for those households. But we had 3 homelessness applications. 2 continued in terms of the full application, and 1 of them was rehoused in Birmingham.
There's a really important difference because, of course, the expectation with the Ukrainian households is that this is a temporary arrangement, and that they will, at the end, return to Ukraine. And so the Afghan scheme, and this kind of goes to your second question, which I'll answer in a minute. It's fully understood that the accommodation they're in at the moment, the Bridging Hotel, is a step towards permanent accommodation in the UK. That's not the status the Ukrainian arrangement has. It's a step towards permanent accommodation back in Ukraine. So it's not surprising in a way that when the Ukrainian placements break down, there's kind of nowhere for them to go. Whereas in the Afghan system, there is somewhere for them to go. There's a kind of process which hopefully ends with them being permanent accommodation. You're absolutely right that for all of these cohorts and the Afghans and the asylum seekers particularly who are in hotels, being in a hotel is not a sustainable accommodation for anybody, particularly a family with children or anyone with any kind of particular needs. We were really pleased when the government said late last year, we'd like you, the council, to actually take a stronger role in helping with the rehousing effort, because bluntly, it's part of our job. It's what we do. And as it turns out, those numbers that Bella described, what we've managed to achieve in that period since the autumn, was a considerably better rate than the Home Office was managing moves into permanent accommodation when they were taking the lead responsibility for that before that. So I share your frustration that the government has not been able to kind of grip this and manage it better. And I know that the families in the hotels feel it too. And it's kind of additionally frustrating because when this hotel, Kensington Chelsea, the last hotel, closes in February, anyone who we haven't managed to move to a permanent home through the support that Bella was describing will move to another bridging hotel before they are then able to move into permanent accommodations. There'll be yet another move to another new neighbourhood with their kids in a different school before they then are able to make a permanent move. So it's hugely frustrating, and we were lobbying quite hard, quite early on, for local authorities to be given a more direct role in the rehousing effort because we could see from what was going on that we could probably do it a bit better than them. Not because it was particularly amazing, but just because it's what we do. It's not what the Home Office does. When we finally got that agreement, we were able to make some progress. And I think if the Bridging Hotel in Kensington Chelsea had been open for another 6 months or a year, we might have stood a fairly good chance of achieving a permanent move for all of the families that were in the hotel. And sadly, I think we're going to run out of runway. We're going to run out of time before that hotel closes in February before we're able to rehouse all the households. But we're putting a lot of effort at the moment into getting as many into permanent accommodation as possible so that as few of them as possible have to make that move into a further hotel before they get a permanent home.
Just to add as an anecdote is that the government's told us that they're going to close it in February. We requested they extended it as the school term to allow the children to finish their year, but they didn't want to do it. So,
Well, just following on, Dan, could you explain to me if you found homes for the Afghans, are they in K and C or are they ambient? Because, you know, if you've got 3,000 on the waiting list, then how can you so easily find homes for Afghans?
So, short answer is no, they're not in KNC. We've identified 4 homes that the council owns ourselves, which we've moved some into, and then there's, I think, 1 further household that moved into a housing association home in the borough. The overwhelming majority are moving to places in the private rented sector outside of KNC, including a large number outside London. The other important thing to say is that they're not moving into social rented homes. They're moving into the private renting market, and crucially, for the first 3 years, they can afford rents, or rents can be afforded for them, which are higher than the local housing allowance rate, because this ongoing subsidy which the Home Office provide means that we can top up the local housing allowance with an additional payment of rent, which means we're searching in a slightly wider pool of accommodation in the private rented sector than we would be for a more regular household that we were supporting, whose rent options would be effectively capped at the local housing allowance rate, if that makes sense. So I'm pleased to say that arrangement means that we're not having to trade off the needs of the people on our waiting list against the needs of that cohort.
Thanks, Chair. And my question on Afghans has been and gone and answered satisfactorily. Thank you. So that's good. So I'll just concentrate on asylum seekers and recognising everything that was said in the introduction. There will be a question anyway, some bit of feedback. While we talk about the large number of hotels in Earls Court, the largest hotel is actually in my ward, and I would say as ward council, it's remarkable how little problem it causes. And it does appear to be well managed. I walk past it regularly, and we have remarkably few comments from permanent residents in the area. So when we're considering the troubles that happen well known in Earls Court, I would be sceptical of linking that with the asylum seekers, and I would be thinking that there are other people housed in Earls Court in various hostels that are probably more likely to be the source of the trouble than the asylum seekers. So I think that's my perception, but
and just on that point, I would absolutely agree with that. In terms of just to kind of explicit what we're talking about, if I'm understanding what you're saying, right? In the sense of antisocial behaviour, I absolutely agree. There's no evidence that we've got that a larger than average number of asylum seekers are engaging in that. The pressures that we're worried about in terms of those high concentrations are more to do with the pressure on local services, GPs, schools, and so on, that's created by those high concentrations in one area. But I agree with you. We all need to be careful about kind of seeing links that aren't there with social behaviour. That's a really important point.
I think that's true, and also with the lack of travelling, it's happened certainly, or it might be increasing again now, but it's kept some hotels in business that might have gone out of business as well. So the Home Office contracts have been of some value there. But of course, the Home Office appears to be increasing the number of hotels, and we're aware of a building that they're acquiring in Earls Court, but it's on the edge of.
I believe that's now been stood down.
Okay. Could I just cover this is the question, because of course the various hotels have been gone over time. Other ward councillors informed.
Yes, we had a meeting with them today.
Of all relevant wards, as opposed to.
Well, on the asylum seekers, yes, we've had discussions with them. Those ward councillors today.
Are there, apart from the one in my ward, are there others elsewhere in the borough?
I think I'm right in saying that all but 2 of them are in Earls Court ward. So there's the one in your ward and one other in one other ward. Otherwise, they're concentrated. I think it's also fair to say, councillor. I mean, my guess is that you, as a ward councillor, were not informed when the hotel was first stood up in your ward. Our focus on this as an officer team has increased quite considerably in the last kind of 3 to 6 months since Bella's been imposed and since we've been able to focus a bit more attention on it. And I think, if I'm really honest, kind of every stone that we've picked up, we've been pretty horrified by what we found under it, if you see what I mean. And so the more we learn about the way these hotels, some of the hotels are being run and the support that's been given, the more we're focusing resource on it. So it's probably fair to say that if a new hotel were open now in a different ward, we might be slightly more proactive in engaging with that, including talking to the councils about it, than we were probably when the first hotels were opened up in the kind of early days of the pandemic.
I think there was an attempt to form councils, and I mean, I think I'd be quite unhappy if one of the hotels in Cromwell was taken over and we didn't know about it.
Yeah,
There's no evidence that they have been. Thank you for that assurance.
Thank you very much. Councillor Simmons.
Thank you. I was just wondering about the private rented sector and what incentives are we giving to those private landlords? And where is that incentive coming from?
We have funding from central government, from the Home Office, and provide background support for families, and then part of that funding instruction is for the local authority to help secure properties and via incentives and deposit payments, etc. And so it comes from central government funding for us to help secure private rented properties.
Okay. So are they cash incentives we're talking about? What do we mean when we say incentives?
Financial incentives.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of questions. First one relates to paragraph 5.10, just in relation to working with the Home Office and Clear Springs. I know at one point quite a lot of meetings take place over teams with senior civil servants, and central government, and just wanted to ask, are they continuing? How regular are they? And you mentioned working closely with those parties, but are you actually satisfied with their engagements? So it's two separate things almost. So,
Let me try and look at this. So, what there isn't is a kind of regular structured pattern of meetings. We have built up over time pretty decent relationships with the officials in the Home Office and the staff at Clear Springs. It's really challenging, I have to say. I mean, they have got an incredibly difficult job. The asylum system is under enormous pressure, and they've got a series of all of their options are not great, and so we recognise, as it were, that they're operating in a very difficult environment. I would say that not only have we been disappointed by some of the decisions they've taken to concentrate these placements in the borough, I think we would also like to see a greater level of kind of engagement and just kind of collaboration. So just to understand better how they take decisions, to get early warning of the decisions they're making and so on. It could be better. I think I'm right. I mean, we had a meeting with when there was the most recent change of ministerial responsibilities, and Robert Jenrick took over as Minister of the Home Office with responsibility for this. He made very clear in a kind of webinar he did for affected boroughs, which we were part of, that he recognised that there had been an issue there, and that he wanted to reset that relationship and make it more positive. And I think we've seen some improvements on that, but I don't think that journey is yet complete. It's fair to say.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's very useful. And then just a second question. This follows on from Councillor Hammond's question. Just to clarify, are you saying that you've not recorded any impact on antisocial behaviour or other crime causative from these placements? Just to be clear.
So we're in quite close contact with the community safety team here, and who are by internal avenues with the police, and who anyway are kind of pay particular attention to Earls Court Ward, where there's kind of particular issues with social behaviour, particularly in that area. And certainly nothing that I've heard, I don't know if you know in different colour, nothing that I've heard suggests that there's any kind of any aggravatory impact of any kind that the placement of these hotels has had on what is already quite a tricky situation. If that
and is there a reason for that? I'm just trying to understand if there is a reason for that, can we ensure that we carry it on, basically? Because you read about other parts of the country where that's not the case, and it's why it's good here.
My guess is, and this really is nothing more than a guess, is that because central London, and particularly perhaps that bit of the borough, is quite a diverse community anyway, it's less of a shock to the system to have people come from another part of the world and be there than it might be in some other parts of the UK, if you see what I mean. But I don't want to be complacent about it, and it's a really good point that you raised, because to the extent that it is kind of not a problem, there's lots that we don't currently understand about this picture because we have such poor information about it, and we don't, unlike with the Afghans, where we're paid to go into the hotels and run a service. That's not how it works with the asylum seekers. So there's probably stuff that we would fully accept that we don't fully understand about how that system is working.
And also, I'm also going to say that because they're asylum seekers and having an application process, maybe that's an incentive to behave.
Can I just add as well, I sit on the Safe KNC board, and there's been no reference whatsoever to any antisocial behaviour in any of the reports in relation to
I think the bigger risk, and I'm pleased to say that this hasn't materialised yet either, the bigger risk might be concerns about them being at risk from people who don't welcome them, if you see what I mean. But again, and that's one of the reasons why we're a bit circumspect about the names of the hotels and the locations and so on. But actually, I'm pleased to say so far, there's no evidence that that's been an issue either.
Thank you.
That's really good.
We will leave that agenda item. Thank you, Councillor Lake. We will leave that agenda item, and if there's any appropriate selected committee can be through by email. And yeah, please.
I'm happy to bring a report back. I mean, as I say, I don't think it should be resolved in paper times. So I'm happy to bring a report back.
Moving agenda item 6. A6 housing allocation scheme. Once again, this agenda item will come back simply because of the consultation that has been done last year. Once again, there's another consultation starting the 5th of this month. Will continue for 6 weeks, perhaps mid to end of next month. So the selection committee will receive further information on the details, data about the consultation by email, or maybe we can have another meeting on this. It will be short, brief. It will be brief updates if you can. If not, we'll be more happy to go to the questions. I understand we've been a long meeting, and we have to give time to the residents who made the journey to the council to be here with us. So, Councillor, tell us.
Okay, very short. So this was obviously the existing scheme, 2014. We had Newman Francis do a consultation, which they did. The feedback of that set out in 3.3. And then obviously we had a public consultation from December to Feb last year. And again, there's a table here which sort of rather summarises the top objectives of the allocated scheme from the council perspective, having taken into account what our residents have come up with. So just reminding myself on the timing, which I'm sure it's set on here.
22nd of February.
22nd of February, our consultation then ends with a view to leadership team and adoption.
Sorry, 16th of
February.
16th of February. So we'll have a chance to know the details in advance because of
Well,
the
you've got,
meeting.
I think you've got pretty good comprehensive details of what's been.
I think what we're proposing to do is to circulate to members of the committee a copy of the consultation report once we've been able to digest and process the results of the consultation and any suggested changes that we make. We've got a chance to consider that ahead of the leadership team report the leadership team receives.
Which will be before the 27th of March, which will be before the actual meeting of leadership. So we won't have time for that. And any further details. Any questions on this? Councillor Gardner.
So I'll send through some detailed comments just on a couple of pages. But for me, I still think it is very complex to understand. I've been through many things before. I did wonder about use of diagrams or pictures, because actually following a flowchart can be much easier for people to understand, and yet this report is remarkably empty on any of those sort of schematics, and perhaps you could look at having a page on that front. The other thing I find is that you read all, can I go on the register, how do I go on the register, how do I qualify, what points do I get? And then suddenly, the process of how you allocate is just another clause number. It's just paragraph 29. And you don't get, actually that needs to stand out, the process that you get told how you apply, you get told when you get a direct, and also the right of refusal. So I genuinely think there are a couple of things you should be flagging separately as a sort of standalone, as opposed to it's just another paragraph. And then, sorry, if you will, just a second. With the review, I don't really get how the housing department is the judge and the jury. And I question, do you have a formal process, or indeed should you have somebody independent that can do that, because if you don't like a review, you then go to complaint, and guess who the complaint is? Again, it's RBKC. And then just on a completely separate, I struggle to understand, even when I read this, homelessness and homeless, and you referred to the Act, which certainly in those entire copies. So when residents are asking for clarity and policy that they can understand, there's still a lot of references to other policies, and there's references to the Act without explaining it. So you rely on lots of other things, and
that's helpful feedback. Yeah, and it's as you say, it's long and complex enough as it is. But if there's more we need to do to set some of that, to kind of do it for the layperson, then that's helpful feedback. Kojo's a bit of an expert on the reviews point, and it's probably worth saying, Kojo, that there's a fairly kind of solid basis in statute, isn't there, for how the reviews process is supposed to work.
Absolutely,
you could also think about that Victoria alignment.
No, absolutely, that's helpful.
Yeah, I've got that. And so your last 2 points, Councillor. So if we start with the reviews, the review team, even though they sit within the council, they're independent of the original decision making. So they just look at it from the cold facts in relation to what does the policy say, what information is there from the officer who made the original decision adequately consider the policy and the residents' needs. Believe it or not, there are decisions internally that are made where the review team actually overturned the original decision to the annoyance of the original officer because of the amount of work that they put in and they give them feedback and so on and so on. And also the other recourse of that is that if a resident is dissatisfied with the decision of the review officer, they do have a right to an independent appeal process which will actually scrutinise the review officer's decision to see whether or not the decision that was made was lawful. So it is, the review team is actually independent.
So can I?
Yeah, sure.
Is it team 1 makes the decision about all housing allocations?
Yes.
And then there's a separate team 2 who deals with reviews. Team 2 never do any housing allocations, and it's not.
It's a reviews team.
It's an actual reviews team. It's only called.
And then I don't think it comes across that there's an appeal from a review.
So this is what I was
other
going to
than it's.
So in terms of your third point, this is the point I was going to make. So in terms of the allocations policy, under the provisions of the legislation, we have to have an allocations policy which sets out how we allocate our homes. The bit in terms of explaining what the homelessness legislation is and so on and so forth, that happens in the original assessment process. So they are given the process is explained to the resident from the beginning to the end, given a letter which explains which section of the legislation applies to them. The allocation policy is separate from explaining to them what the actual housing, homelessness, entitlements that the resident has. So they're linked.
They don't know whether they're homeless or they don't know if they fall into that because you refer them to a separate piece of legislation.
No, so the homelessness part will happen first, and then they will be explained. It will be explained to them what rights they have under the provisions of the legislation. And then if we have a full housing duty towards them, that is the second part of the process where the allocations policy will be explained to them. But the allocations policy has to refer by law to the homelessness legislation.
That's the step. Thank you. And can I just say one little thing, just in terms of the review, where I think Coach is being a bit more, is our review panel are now doing third party for other councils as well, I'd like to say that. You know, as an independent service. They're a good review panel, and it's, they're very independent.
So I think it would be useful for you to make it quite clear it's an independent review team, because I think you sell yourself short if that's the case, because it does look as if you're and then yes.
Yeah.
I think you've raised a valid point, and I think it would be good if you, as you said, you write in details for the comments you have, and if you can include the select committee members, it would be good to know the response as well. Councillor here first, and then.
Thank you very much. Chair, I'll give you all 3 points in one go. So the first one is, do you have any concept or ambition even on how many extra properties might be released annually through the incentives to downsizing you've got in here, and have any other local authorities tried that sort of incentivising, how do they get on? That's my first.
Should we answer them on the top?
Go on then. Yes.
In relation to the downsizing, we believe that there are indicatively potentially about 1,600 households or 100. So we're actually looking at working with the residents to try and mobilise them so they can release those properties to try and alleviate some of the pressures.
So in terms of success, then what we could look like 1,600 to be quite at the ambitious end.
Yes. Well. So we started this work about 2 years ago, and so far we've been able to move approximately about 60 or 70 households and throughout those properties, and that's just one officer. So it is a focus as part of our rehousing strategy. Is one of our focus attention.
It's potentially not a not insignificant dent to be made in our waiting list by this.
Yes, it's also even at this stage without this. Second point was that one of the residents' priorities from the first consultation was recognising the need for one additional bedroom in recognition of overcrowding. He decided not to do that. Yeah. And I think you were to ask why you just say a bit more about that.
It's simple again, the question of the numbers. It would be a good thing to do, but the impact that would have on our waiting list would be negative. But go to.
Yeah. So we felt that by going ahead with what was proposed, it would definitely increase the demand, and we felt that what we need to do is actually look at ways in which we can support those people who are living in those properties to be housed in other ways. And some of that is rehousing through some of the options which Bella mentioned earlier. It may mean people actually, moving out of the borough. It may mean people and being independent voluntary decisions. It may mean people actually being rehoused outside of the borough. But we just felt that it would not actually, it would increase demand, but it wouldn't actually address the problem.
Yes, finally, and just slightly tangentially, we've been talking about increasing supply, but void properties are going to be an issue. I think we're going to talk about empty homes in a later meeting, so I'd be very interested when we do the empty homes to talk about councils voids at that stage, and I've been long-term voids, and of course you always have some other from that's something like the empty homes, but we'll leave it there for now.
Thank you. Councillor
Thank you
Sims,
very
then.
much. Just very quickly, I can't find a page in here, but it was on the online version. There was a very helpful table that showed the changes. And it was the very bottom column, I think it was succession, where I think there's 50 points. So for instance, if someone succeeds a tenancy which has, for instance, more bedrooms than they need, and that I presume is to incentivise maximising the use of the plus bedroom property. Yeah. What page?
Page 44.
Oh, thank you. And I was just going to suggest that perhaps 50 points might not be when you've got people with 2,000 points. Perhaps there could be a greater incentive, given that the fact that there is only 3 bedrooms and larger.
So what was that?
Yeah, it's got it down, I think it's a change to 50 points.
You can actually grow this part of the house.
So that's page 121.
So the question is, could that be more points to kind of increase the
the
weight of the incentive?
Yeah, that was just one suggestion. And then I had a question following on about the reviews. Covo, there's a review ongoing that I know that you're aware of.
Yeah.
And my understanding is that that review is being conducted by the same person who made the decision. Am I incorrect?
Yes.
I'm incorrect.
Yes.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Oh, as I've offered to, I can speak to you and go through.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful.
Who the other launching officers.
Thank you, Councillor Rossi.
Yeah, there's obviously a mismatch between the council's perspective on allocating houses and the perspective of the residents. And it's something which I find very difficult. I mean, I completely understand about the scarcity of housing. I completely get it, but there's got to be some way of, I don't know, lowering expectations in terms of residents, because they just don't understand. Like, for example, I have one at the moment who, it's a family who are overcrowded by one room, so the 6 of them, there's 2 bedrooms, very, very cramped. This guy has come back to me, and it's about the 3rd time he's been told he can't go on the housing list. But he just doesn't understand it. And, you know, a lot of the time, I think what the residents have come out with is really good. It's just we can't give it to them. And so I think we have to kind of think, well, how do we explain ourselves? I mean, you know, we have to do it individually all the time to explain to people, yes, you are very overcrowded, but you can't go on the housing list.
Yeah. So, Councillor Rosie, I agree with you. I think that there's definitely a piece of work we need to do as a service in relation to the quality of advice that we deliver and the way we deliver the advice. We have had a number of, this is not an excuse by the way, but we have had a number of staffing changes, and there are some new staff who we're trying to train up for them to become experienced in housing and homelessness advice and the way in which they deliver it. But that is something which is on our agenda at the moment. We are working to ensure that people get the correct advice, and also that they have appropriate options available to them, and we're realistic about the housing prevailing circumstances within the borough, and not only in the borough, actually in London, because it is a London-wide issue, and how we can support them, because some residents, I think this is the thing about this allocations policy, it's about trying to support people to be in settled situations sooner, rather than going into temporary and being there for 5 to 10 years and actually not being settled. So helping people to actually make decisions where they can settle in their environments. And it is a challenge, but it is something that we are.
But I sometimes think it's a thing that residents think we're denying them, that we've got them, we've got these houses, but we won't give them to them. We're giving it to somebody else. So, yeah, it's very difficult to explain to people who are very overcrowded that you don't qualify, because they are, but they're not overcrowded enough to get.
Or they're not, as it were, the most overcrowded, or they've been waiting the longest time.
Yeah.
It's absolutely right, and it's kind of, to what Kojo's saying, you know, the people who work in the team did not come into this line of work to be telling people what they have to tell people every day, which is, you know, to make these incredibly, kind of, passing this incredibly kind of unwelcome news to people who are often in really difficult, desperate situations. And so there's tremendous kind of skill and care in, as Kojo says, being realistic whilst doing it in a way which is genuinely kind of empathetic and which is kind of getting those messages across. And I think probably, you know, actually, documents like this are the least important bit of telling that story. It's a job that our team just has to be doing every day, of finding the right way to get that across. And it's absolutely right, as you say, Council. Actually, Council is a part of that effort too, because you see people directly every day in the same situation. And we have a collective responsibility to show kind of maximum compassion, whilst also being, unfortunately, kind of rather brutally honest about some of these realities.
Thank you. Final comment, I think, Councillor Sanders.
Very quick, I guess it's a suggestion, following on from previous comments. I know that we've had some correspondence about the tone of communications and the letters that get sent to people. And I understood from you that there's some work going on to improve that, like you say, with empathy and compassion, and to be able to explain things in a way that people can understand. And I just wondered if how that works going.
Yeah, so it is an ongoing piece. Trying to get the balance right between the tone right, which is absolutely important, but also having the appropriate legal information in the letters, because these letters are subject to judicial challenge. but just trying to get, I think a lot of it is also around the explanation. So actually providing the letter to a resident and explaining it to them, so ensuring that the tone is correct, but also explaining it to them face to face, or over the telephone. It's an ongoing piece of work.
Great, thanks. Because I think when you're telling someone that basically they have to leave their accommodation that day, they know where to go. I don't think including the correct legal information precludes some kindness and support.
Absolutely.
And I think letters which
I mean, some of our eviction
threatened
notices,
and
I mean,
afraid,
oh
yeah.
my God.
Yeah.
You look at them, you think, oh,
yeah,
it's a good point.
Councillor Taylor Smith has given me feedback on one that he said, and one that you mentioned as well, that particular case. We've given feedback to the officer as well, not only in terms of their letter, but also their communication with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner.
Can I just ask, on your encouragement to move to the private rented sector, what are you expecting the success rate to be?
It's a very good question. We are a lot better than we were. I think that what we've done is we have recruited a former estate agent, right, who is experienced in actually negotiating and from an empathetic point of view and understanding that, okay, we've got these on people, but he understands the housing market as well. So there are properties that come across his doorstep which he doesn't actually offer to our residents because he understands the full profile of their circumstances and it's not suitable. But having that communication and understanding that, look, okay, we know that it's not ideal what you want. However, this is the support you can have. We found that it's been really helpful. To quantify it would be very difficult for me to do so. But last year, I think we did around 250 private sector lets.
So diverting people away from a formal homelessness acceptance into the private.
Yes, exactly. And this was prior to him starting.
Yeah.
So we think that.
And so then, with the introduction of the additional incentive through the allocation scheme of additional points for people to take that route, I think you could. I'm not sure we know, we can see it enough to put a number on this, if you see what I mean, but it's a really good question.
I think we'll have to review it a year after the implementation and then maybe look at the data and compare it to the previous year to see how successful it is.
Thank you.
And we're setting money aside for a deposit to help in that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We conclude on that agenda item and we move on to the before the final agenda item of work program report. We will go for the HRA business plan. And my apologies to the councillors who are here. Chair, the chairman for the overview of the scrutiny committee as well as the working group. So it's on a positive note, we are going back to the pre-pandemic housing and community scrutiny committee timetable. We need to finish around at this time, so apologies if the dinner is late, but I think we're allocating more time for the residents who are here this evening, and I think that's a good point to take on board. Councillor Smith.
I really don't have anything to say. I'll let us go straight through that. Outline a little bit on the.
Sure, I won't go through it in a huge amount of detail. You've got the draft business plan in front of you. I mean, basically, it identifies that if we want to complete one whole round of capital works, it's going to come to about 619 million. We've got 219 million available to us. That means there's a 400 million deficit. We can't really borrow 400 million. That would send the housing revenue account into a deficit, which is illegal. So we need to do something else if we want to achieve that 619 million. We've got a number of unknowns. So when you're trying to set the business plan at the present moment in time, I suspect every single local authority has got this problem because you've got no certainty over rent at the present moment in time. The government set a rent cap at 7%. For the forthcoming year. Up to that point, it had been CPI, inflation plus 1%, CPI plus 1%. Clearly, it's dependent on factors, so interest rates and inflation going up are very detrimental to the balance of the housing revenue account. So that means we have to look at things like So borrowing is obviously a tool, but you don't want to borrow a significant amount of money when the interest rates are at this level. If you feel that there are other things you can do. So one of the other things we're looking at is clearly looking at the income that we have available. We're looking at what we charge for, what charges we make, and there's a bit about that in the rent policy. How we reduce charges, reduce our overheads and make efficiencies in terms of our delivery. We're looking also at vacant dwellings, and that's what we might want to do. We do get, it's a difficult one, and we did take this to the Tenants Consultative Committee, but we do have properties that do become empty through natural voids that are usually street properties that might be bespoke, that cost us a lot of money to keep running, and in terms of the rent, don't make a great return if you were looking at this as a business, but are often the most desirable properties. So if you sold those, and you could then prop up the capital program, or you could even be providing and using the difference to do that. So there are things that we are definitely going to have to look at if we want to keep the 7,000 tenant properties and 2,000 odd leaseholder properties in the right condition.
Thank you. Any questions?
Can I answer my question?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I think Kim knows what it is. And the renting policy, it doesn't actually say in the report that it's 7%, but Doug just said that was the cap. So is it still, for this year, 23-24, is it still 7%? Is that not too high?
So well, inflation is over 10 and a bit percent at the present moment in time. So it is lower than inflation. And for us to be able to carry out the works that we need to, so last week the leadership approved £40 million to be spent in Silchester. That money has to come from somewhere. And whilst we appreciate that this isn't the best time to be putting up charges, we are also recommending that we put a tenancy sustainability element to our budget setting for next year. So within the revenue budgets, we will allocate budgets to help and assist residents. We feel that we could do more around those that are experiencing hardship.
It's not a decision we take lightly, but the on balance really was that we needed to sustain the programme of investment. We needed to clutch that 7% cap. If the government hadn't set the cap at 7%, and we'd have had the option to go up to the full CPI +1, we may well have ended up in a position where we set it around 7%, i.e. not going up to the full. But with that being the cap, we felt that was actually probably the minimum that we could.
And we don't at this stage know if it will revert back to CPI +1% or what it will look like next year.
Thank you.
Just to add on page 195 in the appendix, you see obviously the capital programme, and we're really ramping up this current year in terms of expenditure. This is the start of it, and we're on many sites, and that's something which we might, again, Mr. Chairman, have to have a look at some of where the refurbishment, big refurbishment programmes are going on and how those are going, etc. But HRA is going to be under tremendous strain. I mean, Doug just talked about Silchester at 40 million, and if you look at that, I mean, our annual revenue is 50. That's before, so it's a massive cost. We're having, because of our commitment, we're not going to regenerate. We're going to obviously repair, and these are expensive buildings to repair.
Thank you. Refurbishment is actually a work program, so once we will see it sometimes. Councillor Simmons and then Councillor.
Thank you. I just wanted to note, Doug, you mentioned at the TCC, speaking about considering the economic viability of street properties. And I just wanted to note that, as I recalled it, residents are quite against that.
They were very much against the loss of stock overall,
Yeah, absolutely.
housing overall.
Yeah.
But
And also,
but
as you say, these are the most desirable properties. So, and potentially they're larger as well, so possibly that might be something that certainly is worth for the committee to note.
Yeah.
Well, I think
So
that
it also
I
says
think
here
it's-
about consultation and resident engagement. So in terms of taking on resident feedback, I think that should just be noted.
Although, Claire, I would say that the issue was selling and not putting it back into additional
Yeah.
homes. What we were saying is high value and then reinvesting it so we don't have a loss of unit homes. And that, certainly from that meeting, was supported. It wasn't don't do it. I
think there were people who thought it might be misguided to be selling off assets
Yeah,
at
and
this
we've
point
had that
in
each
time.
time we've brought it up. It's not a popular thing, and it's not
No.
something we would do lightly, because
course.
here we are looking for additional homes. But in terms of making the balance and the books balance and giving us an ability to continue on our refurbishment programme, it is a really important aspect.
Yeah, I mean, we've brought it twice to Town's Consultative Committee, and it's very much a choice about if it means I'm not going to get new windows to keep my property insulated correctly, because we haven't got the capital to do that, or sell a few properties that then can fund that. But not lose overall stock, because we have some build. If we sell properties that we can then reinvest in perhaps X right buys or something like that, then people would be seemingly understand why we would have to do that. It's not a great decision to make, but we're in this position where there's been sadly quite a lot of underinvestment in our property.
So it's about the least unpalatable.
Yeah, it's about the least
I think that's a shame for residents to have to pay the cost of decisions to underinvestment. That's fine, but the other point I wanted to quickly raise was about Silchester Major Works. I think it's 46 million, including that.
That's including VAT.
Yeah. It's like 38
We don't pay VAT.
38.
Well, in the leadership decision it was mentioned, so I assumed it was relevant.
Yeah, no, it's we have to stay because of the procurement thresholds are determined on the basis of the value plus VAT. So we're legally obliged to mention VAT in the reports, but we can assure you that the council doesn't pay.
So I just wanted to raise concern about that, because there are, I think, 35 leaseholders in Silchester who have lived for 30 plus years with the underinvestment we were just speaking about, through no fault of their own and consequences of that. And now they are being potentially hit with a bill of £100,000, bill or a debt, their choice. The council's been very flexible. But I just wanted to query the reasonableness of that. And whether or not you get the money, or whether you impose a debt. If it's a debt, which it will be for most people, you're not going to get that income.
I think
So I think maybe that needs to be looked at.
We're obliged by law to pass on the cost. The
Actually, you can make a discretionary reduction on cap.
But if we did that, we'd be taking the money out of we'd be taking the money away from the rents that people pay. If you see what I mean. So there's a direct trade-off there, because you can only take it from the housing revenue account. The other parts of
But there are other financial arrangements that can be made if there is a will to do so. And I just wanted to make sure that this was raised with you guys and also with the committee. That the impact of asking someone for £100,000 just like that is severe, and even if you say you could pay it for 25 years, that's like making them have another mortgage. Some of these people are pensioners.
Well, exactly. How old are they?
Well, again, let's just step back a bit. I mean, as it's set out here, we're spending 400 million. I mean, why select Silchester in terms of giving concessions to a leaseholder? What about Henry Dickens
Well, it applies
or
to- it
Whitchurch
applies-
or whatever? But the point is,
It applies to the law.
can I finish
I just
my
want-
point?
I just want to say it applies
Can I
to
just
the law.
finish my point? So my point is that the HRA is all predicated on us recovering a proportion of the costs from leaseholders. That's what we are statutorily required to
That's
do.
not what I'm challenging.
It's not a charity. We can't turn around and say, yeah, don't worry, we'll let
That's
you
not
off.
what I'm
So
challenging.
we have a responsibility of collecting money back from all leaseholders, including Silchester. What we're trying to do is look at how we might shelter the cost and support them in doing that. And we put together a number of interest-free over a period. I accept it's a period of debt. I accept that a number of people see this as years of neglect. It's also a number of years, had we had a sinking fund which when we come to TCC and we suggest sinking funds, people don't want to do a sinking fund because they don't want to pay the extra, etc. Had there been a sinking fund, like a lot of people do, then there wouldn't have been such a shock at the end. So it is a little bit horses for courses, and I think we're also victim of a previous view that some of the properties, Silchester's a good example, the best thing you could do is regenerate them. You know, which from a leaseholder point of view, I know when I've been to meetings leaseholder, that's great because we pay by their property with a premium in order to do the work. But as far as the residents are concerned, the residents obviously don't want it because they'll be displaced and they're fearful of doing it. But if you look at Silchester at 38 million net of that, just on 4 towers, I mean, that is just, if you look at it economically, that's madness. But that is our commitment to ensure people have good, decent.
Councillor Simmons, thank you. Councillor Simmons, if you want to come back, it's fine. But just want to clarify on the point you've mentioned, the type of buildings or properties that will be sold. Are you referring to the community properties?
No,
or
I was
publicly
referring to
used or-
street
or
properties
street
that they
properties?
referred to.
Oh, for that.
So council homes, but not in estates and blocks.
So the issue goes back to, let's say, if we have a 3-bedroom property in Chelsea where the price is very high.
Yeah.
Or in Dalgarno.
Or in Delgado, any matter, anywhere for that reason. But then again, what shall we do with the residents that leaves that property?
Well, if there were void property that came up, we would be looking at the alternative is to refurbish it or to sell it.
I think we've talked about this issue some time ago, I think last year. We mentioned that we have to have a diverse community where it happens to be in Delgado or in Chelsea or in high end of Kensington, wherever it is, the community should live side by side and regardless of the price of the property. But that's something I'm sure that the housing team will have to.
As we say, it's the least worst options that we're trying to look at. It's trying to balance our responsibility for keeping the properties up to the right level against the changes in the economic climate.
Any other
One
question?
very quick comment.
Thank you very quick. Thank you.
Just in terms of item 5, 5.1, in terms of housing management, I'm told that there's going to be a levelling up of housing management, and you can be aware of that because Lancaster West Estate is managed separately. So effectively, there's different levels of service. And certainly within my ward, which is Nottingdale, there are issues surrounding that. I think in terms of fairness and equality. I've spoken to Doug about it, and I understand it's a piece of work.
Thank you. That was an agenda item passed, but you made them.
I'm more than happy to come back on another
yes,
day.
please do come back another time, because.
I think you have a lot of people from Lancaster West coming as well.
I will come back to you, sir. I'll come back to you one more, Councillor Hammond.
Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks very much for your patience in coming so late on the agenda. In terms of closing this £400 million gap, I can see the pragmatism of selling isolated street properties. You know, for it seems to be quite imaginative and useful thing to do, but you've got a number of other options and things that you're exploring. What's your timeline for making decisions on else? It's a big number.
So without us doing anything different, we've certainly got enough resources to cover us for the next couple of years. But we really should get this sorted over the course of the next 12 months and get a policy decision. But even if we do go down a route where we have to make that, I mean, the other thing that we could do is, of course, is try and extend the capital time period, i.e. defer works as well, is an option, which I didn't mention.
But good practice is to bring a 30-year sustainable business plan in every budget cycle. We've not been able to do that this year. We'd be very uncomfortable getting to another year from now and still not having a plan that we were confident was sustainable. So,
and we really do hope that we'll get some guidance on the rent policy going forward. Because at the moment can't set the rent. The rent is governed by government.
That's a big assumption.
And so knowing roughly what that's going to be as you go forward, that's a business plan. So yes, we've got to get it sorted this year.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner.
I am right, I think, reading the report, you talk about having to make £20 million worth of savings next year. And when I look at Appendix 1, I can't really work out where you get 20 million savings of that 130 million. I'm trying to work out if I misread it, so I've just.
Well, that's the capital programme you're looking at
Yeah.
on that page, yes, in terms of just overall spend.
And I had, sorry,
That's
I
just-
thought I'd read somewhere that you have to make 20 million savings. And then my other question, whilst I still keep looking for that, is what are the charges that you would consider increasing? So I would like to want you to understand what are the services that you either think you could ask for a fee.
So, of course, none of this would be popular with residents, I get that 100%, but there are things that we don't, so we don't charge. So you can look at your parking charges, you can look at some of your service charges, which there are services that we provide. If you provide a service to every resident, then you can't put that down as a service charge. If you provide services to some residents, other residents don't get, you can levy a charge for that. So CCTV, Entraphone maintenance, stuff like that, you can add in as a charge, which would be on top of the rent. So you can do those sorts of things. There are other charges for things that you don't charge, like bike sheds or things like that. So you can.
Thank you. Any further questions on that? Or shall
I'm
I
not
move
suggesting
to-
we do, I'm just saying it's an option we do.
Of course. Councillor Pascal, since you're the chair of the budget working group, do you have any question on this?
Yes, I just wanted to make one point, and it's a similar question I asked in the previous. But I just wanted to say that we definitely recognise the sterling work that's been done in this area to address some really big funding issues. And we know that this is a work in progress. One of the things that we will recommend in the Budget Working Group is that this is reviewed again by the Budget Working Group going forward next year. I understand it's a wider capital funding issue across the whole council being worked and developed by the finance side of the council as well as this particular department. But we recognise that there's enormous progress being made. I think it's worth putting that on the record. The question I want to ask though is that in parallel with the question I asked on the new homes policy, is it right to say that under the ambition of going carbon net zero, the refurbishment works in the HRA paper here that we're talking about are unlikely to reach the carbon zero results? In other words, the specification that's been put into refurbishment schemes, is this going to have a similar answer in terms of how far it gets?
It won't be, it won't, I mean, you might be able to get to net zero, but absolute zero in terms of zero from the capital works, and no, that won't be.
A listed building like Trellick Tower, you'll never get to carbon zero.
Yeah.
So
in a similar way, the answer is that there would be some form of tariff development in relation to that. That would be the model that you foresee going forward. So you wouldn't be able to achieve carbon zero, and therefore there would be some form of tariff.
If to meet that ambition, then you'd have to, yes.
You'd have to do a very large carbon offset.
Yeah. Okay. That just. But the amount of that offset would be known.
Thank you.
That's what I need.
Councillor Gardner wants to make a brief and then followed by.
I did find it, paragraph 10.2, plan to set the budget for 2 years, 23-24, 110, and 24-25, 105 million. That doesn't then marry with the figures on in appendix 1. So I don't really understand what I'm proposing for the plan. Sorry.
So that's the next 2 years capital. Yeah.
Isn't that with appendix 1?
So
So
this is-
showing out at 30 million.
Okay, so my apologies. So what you've got in appendix 1 is, as you see, it have 22, 23, 22, 23 is almost over. This is the planned spend for the programmes that start with. The actual budget is what you expect to go out, and so lots of these projects take more than a year to be done, so they might roll into the next financial year. So that's
So
the
you've got
issue.
2024 25 is 105 million, and it's showing here is 111
Yeah,
million.
so I think in the report, the amount I think we're giving 105 is that it's the amount of money literally they expect to spend in that year.
as opposed to what we commit.
In the table, it's the projects that will start in that year, even though some of that money will then be spent in later years.
So we should make that a lot clearer. My apologies.
Councillor Jack, yes, you name please.
Yeah, it's Ian Smith again. Usually when this report gets presented, there's a chart detailing the rent rises in the other inner London boroughs, the percentage rises in other boroughs. So how does the rise here compare with other inner London boroughs? That's my first question.
You have a second question you want to follow up?
Well, the second question is about charging for things that we were already paying for as tenants, already paying for things like, you know, if you live on an estate, you don't only just have your flat, you have the grounds, the gardens, the car parking space. Residents pay for car parking, but they pay the cost of generally administering the scheme. Now, if you start renting out parking spaces to whoever, you'll get people driving, if one estate's full up, they drive into another estate to look for parking spaces. And that will generate more pollution and is very unacceptable to TfL.
Thank you, Ian, for taking the time to stay. Sure.
Can I just
Sure.
The question about the percentage rises is important because we usually have a slide each year which shows Kensington and Chelsea having the highest rises of any inner London borough. That's comparing it with other so-called flagship boroughs like Wandsworth, for example. We always have higher rises.
We'll now get the answer. And
so, of course, every local authority in London at the moment is going through the discussion that we're going through, and most budgets, some people might set their rent rise in January, but most in February. So we're not 100% sure what everyone is actually going to sign off. Certainly through London councils, pretty well everyone I've spoken to,
yeah, me too,
is going exactly the same as well, which is along the government's cap, because they're all under the same pressure on their housing revenue account, because we've got lots of, we've had lots of issues to do with safety to deal with. We've had stuff that we're doing on zero carbon. We've got lots of new demands on what needs to happen, and therefore that's pushing up costs on top of the time when the ability to borrow your capital and the cost of that have gone up substantially.
We should presumably, by the time that the budget comes to full council, have a firmer picture of what other boroughs are doing. We might be able to include that information in the report that goes to full council.
Yes, that would be. Ian, will that answer the question?
Yeah, I'll be at the full council.
Thank you very much. And the second question?
The other question, the other thing about parking is really important because, you know, you face loads of problems because I did report of council to TfL in 2014.
I was reminded of the second question you have asked it already. Please, the second question.
So we had a task and finish group that looked at service charges, and the response from that was not to put up service charges pretty well. I think you're on that group, and we listened to that and we thought, okay, this isn't the time to be doing that. The problem is the situation's got more acute, and I think that's why we need to really think about where appropriate charges would be. So you could turn it. I'm not talking about parking because parking is we already charge for it. It's just a level of charge for it, and we've got a very clear message that residents don't want us to, in any big way, to let out parking privately if we can avoid it.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, the parking's still a lot more than the parking permit. A lot more.
Definitely. Inner estate parking, is that what you were?
Yeah, on an estate,
yeah. Any response to that? It's inner estate where a local estate that is full, others are parking somewhere else, and they'll be charged, perhaps, are they charged twice, or what are you referring to that?
Well, if you have a car and you want to park on an estate, you pay a weekly rent for that space.
Yeah.
That's how the system works.
So there's no charge, no
for the
change.
resident.
For the resident.
Yeah.
And private residents who don't live on that estate pay a significant premium to park on that. So if we've got spaces left over and there's no waiting, then that's what we do. Just so you know, there is borough-wide consultation going out on parking policy in January. Happy to bring back here. It's often a very contentious area amongst residents. I'm very happy to bring it here at some stage if you wish, but we will be carrying out all borough-wide, not January, sorry, February next month. It's due imminently to go out. The reason it hasn't gone out is because we don't want to have effects. But when that results in that, we can easily feed that back to.
Mr. Chairman, the HRA is under tremendous pressure. You know, we've talked about, you know, should we be increasing by 7%? Should we be doing additional charges? I mean, at the end of the day, we've got to balance the books. You know, or should we be giving more money back to our leaseholders? That comes out of our residents' pockets. You know, and we mustn't forget that. So I know it's always going to be unpopular if I do a survey and say, you know, should I put the charges up? Oh, no, I don't want to do that. You know, but, you know, we're going to have to make some pretty tough decisions here.
Thank you. I hope that answers the question you have raised. Is there any other questions? Answer is no. Thank you very much. Again, you think that agenda item. And finally, we are going to the work program. And Jackie, if there's anything to mention, no, we're happy to receive. On that note, sorry.
I do apologise, but we had a diary invite this afternoon to a housing, I guess it's the RP meeting. There was no presentation about it, which I can't do. What's going on with
Yes.
Yeah, that's the annual conference.
Yes, I know, but it just came out with a date without any discussion.
I think we should all look into that date and if we can make it or maybe suggest Thank you. Thank you very much. On that note, we end the meeting. And once again, thank you very much for your time. There's no other agenda item that work program. We just talked about it. Yes, we just talked about it, and there is an email that has been sent, and the date will be shared by email, and officers will come back to us on that.
I think the language.
It's a conference with registered providers. The invitation came from housing colleagues, and Luke's going to
up today.
Yes, it happens today.
March.
And
Okay, I want to go to it.
It does not work for everyone, so what we'll do is we will communicate by email, and then Saturday that's useful for us. Thank you very much for your attendance, and apologies for the long meeting, but there you go. Back to normal. Agreed, and then thank you all for your time. The meeting ends. The meeting is